Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Comics Rot Your Brain, the show where screenwriters talk about the comic books that we love, mostly from the 1980s. And I am Steven Bagatourian.
And I'm Chris Derrick.
And Chris, we are talking about a character that I love so much today, Vic Sage, a.k.a. The Question. And he is a character that was originally invented by none other than SteveDitko, the co-creator of Spider-Man. Let me give the people just a quick sort of log line on this character here. Vic Sage is an investigative journalist by day and an urban vigilante by night. This reinvention of the Question retains some familiar elements from the original Ditko version, including the iconic faceless mask that Vic Sage wears when he goes out to fight crime in the horrific environment of Hub City. Now, Vic Sage also, though, courtesy of O'Neil and Cowan, was imbued with a unique Zen philosophy, very unique for comics at that time. And this forced him to ask vital questions about the methods he was employing while fighting crime in the corrupt city known as Hub City that he lived in. Now, there are deadly martial arts assassins and political intrigue galore to contend with. The question is, will one man, even a master of unarmed combat, be able to make a difference? And this was when Ditko went to go work for Charlton Comics in the 70s. And people may or may not realize this, but the character emerged out of Ditko's strong belief in the philosophies of Ayn Rand and what you'd call objectivism. And this philosophy essentially believes that there is a strong sort of line between good and evil, right and wrong, good and bad. And that was the initial inspiration for the Question's mind state as he was out there fighting crime. But it became a very different kettle of fish, a whole different vibe when in 1987, Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan decided to reinvent the character and reboot Vic Sage, a.k.a. The Question, and they turned it into a character that I'm not quite sure that Steve Ditko would have recognized, and I would have been curious to find out his thoughts on it, but they turned The Question into a character that I personally fell in love with in '87, and there's so much to talk about here. It's super exciting.
Yeah, this book was amazing. It came out at a time right before Vertigo Comics launched and probably gave Karen Berger and the brass at DC the confidence that they could launch that mature reader line.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I totally agree. I think between The Question and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing and, you had these early DC books and maybe Grant Morrison's Animal Man, you had these early books that were kind of like the proof of concept for what would become Vertigo Comics. And I think The Question is a book that is not talked about enough because I think it was an essential piece of the puzzle that ultimately did lead to what would be Vertigo Comics 5 or 6 years later. So yeah, this is important comic book history, folks.
Just to tell you about the time when this book came out, right? So it's 1987. This is the year when X-Men was burning up the chart. It was during the Mark Silvestri run. It's also the year that Marvel launched its first Punisher series. And it's the year that the black and white explosion died. And what's crazy is this was the year that the Watchmen first debuted in trade paperback to little fanfare, but it was about to explode in popularity, as we all know. And and the rest of the stuff that was going on in the world at the time that people remember was this was the trial of Bernard Goetz, who was the New York City subway vigilante. And it was the year that the Iran-Contra affair scandal was wrapping up. And now get this. This is the craziest thing. This is how fertile the creative period was. Here are some of the movies that came out in '87. Predator, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Platoon, Fatal Attraction, The Untouchables, Lethal Weapon, RoboCop, Full Metal Jacket, Dirty Dancing, Princess Bride, The Running Man, Star Trek 4, and Eddie Murphy's Raw. Can you believe that? And this is the year that DC decides to put out the question.
Wow, what a moment. What a moment in pop culture for Dennis Cowan and Denny O'Neil to drop this sophisticated rebranding and reimagining of Steve Ditko's Urban Vigilante. And we got a real heck of a deep discussion here about every aspect of the question. And it's phenomenal. And you see so much evolution over the course of this series in the writing of Denny O'Neil himself. It's really a high watermark for him. And I think this is the series where Dennis Cowan also truly comes into his own as an artist. He'd done a little bit of work beforehand on Power Man and Iron Fist for Marvel. He'd had a run on that. And he'd done some one-off work for DC Comics on books like Vigilante and Teen Titans. But, you know, we talked about this before, Chris. It was really the question, I think, that defined Dennis Cowan's style and put him on a path where he's going to go on to become a legendary artist himself, co-founder of Milestone Comics, and just a tremendous figure in comics history, as is, of course, Denny O'Neil. This is just an amazing high point, I think, for both of these men. And what a comic! What a comic! Yeah,
it was crazy. Just to go back to, to read this again. And I think we had an explosive, amazing, like wild discussion. And so now let's get on with the show.
Today we're talking about the question, Chris.
Yeah. So let's just jump in.
Yeah. Let's discuss the book by the two Dennys, the two Dennises, Cowan and O'Neil. And I also want to give respect to the rest of the team on the book. We've got Rick Magyar on the inks, and Gaspar Saladino doing the lettering, and Tatiana Wood as the colorist, and Mr. Mike Gold was the editor. So a very well-respected team across the board there, folks who've worked on a lot of comics, but really this is Cowan and O'Neil's show primarily, I would say. They're bringing a tremendous amount of just vision to this book, and it's a really unique book for the time. And I will say that there's a lot to talk about here.
This for sure. One thing.
Yeah, go for it.
One thing. The covers are all done by Dennis Cowan, at least these 8, and inked by Bill Sienkiewicz.
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you said that.
It's just fascinating because these guys become lifelong friends from probably working on this book.
I think they were friends a little time before this, but they definitely have been friends for going on like 30 or 40 years now, or something crazy. Because this book, I can't even believe it, Chris, because I was doing the math, and this book came out 86. Like, if I'm not wrong, is that really 35 years ago?
Yeah.
Like, that's fucking insane. That's fucking insane to me, because I remember reading this book as a little kid. It's fucking wild. So I'm guessing Cowan and Sienkiewicz's friendship goes back 4 decades, because they were sharing a studio famously with Michael Davis. And they were next door, like we were just talking about a second ago. They were next door to Chaykin and Frank Miller and Walt Simonson, I believe. Like, this was a crazy time and a crazy studio space. I mean, just legends, stone cold legends, all those guys in the comic book business, and all of them working in the same general studio space. That is just wild to consider.
I think what's wild is that, these guys are all working in New York at the time. And I don't think that kind of studio space today would be affordable by anybody in New York. I think that's kind of like why the 70s and 80s were a magical time for just artists in New York in general. Obviously, that's like the time of like Warhol and Basquiat and Keith Haring and Robert Mapplethorpe and stuff like that. But it's like because the studio space was cheap. You know?
That's a great point.
Like that whole kind of like, like Midtown Manhattan, like around like Times Square was just like a fucking, it was like persona non grata. What do they call them now? No-go zones in like certain cities where it's like you're not supposed to go. I mean, I think people I don't think people could believe that looking at Times Square now, but that's what that was from around like the early 70s to around like to late 80s. It's just like this wasteland.
Yeah. It was a different world.
Yeah. But this is This is an interesting book. I think the creative team is fascinating on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you said, this is pre-Vertigo. It's weird reading this now and after having been exposed to Vertigo books, because this doesn't feel, it certainly doesn't feel like a Marvel book of this era, which would have been like a Daredevil or a Punisher or something like that. It's way more, it's more cerebral.
It's extremely cerebral. That's a good word for it. It's very spiritual, spiritual and cerebral, I would say, because it's like, I'm thinking spiritual because of all the Zen sort of Buddhist stuff and all of the stuff that Denny O'Neil brings to it, where we're talking about Vic Sage having these like near-death experiences or actual experiences of death. And so it's this really interesting kind of combination between this very cerebral, intellectual, political storyline. And as we get into describing what it's a very political story too, but it's like smashing all of that real world political stuff and the more cerebral stuff up against this spiritual kind of Zen, New Age, whatever you want to call it, more of an Eastern philosophy. And I think it's really fascinating because it's not something certainly that I was ever exposed to in American comics prior to the question. And like you say, this is before Vertigo. So this was just a comic from the company that brought you Batman and Superman. It was just another comic, and Batman even makes an appearance in the question in these issues here, whether it's in a dream or not. Batman appears to Vic Sage and talks to him at one point. So it's just such a weird mashup of just disparate elements in this story. And it does feel entirely unique. Like, I really don't know any other comic that feels like the question. And certainly Steve Ditko's original conception of the question was nothing like this. And Steve Ditko famously is a guy who's all about objectivism, and he's all consumed with the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And, that really, it's a philosophy that could not be further from sort of like Denny O'Neil, and I think, and the political orientation that he was approaching this book from, because I think Denny O'Neil, from my understanding, was a dyed-in-the-wool progressive, and like a super progressive kind of bleeding heart, quote unquote, liberal kind of a guy whose politics probably, frankly, are a lot closer to mine than Steve Ditko's. And so I think it's really interesting that O'Neil chose this character of the question also to make a lot of political statements in a way that I don't know that Steve Ditko necessarily would have appreciated, because Ditko famously, like Ayn Rand, was all about black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. And I think what O'Neil and Cowan are exploring here in the question, and what they continue to explore in the series quite brilliantly, it really comes down to a whole lot of gray areas and a lot of in-between sort of moral areas where there are not necessarily always great decisions to be made. And I think it's really just, it's a very ahead of its time book. It's a lot deeper and had a lot more on its mind than many books from that era. And although I don't think it succeeds perfectly in every single respect, and there's moments here and there, I think, that work better than others, I think overall, to me, it's a real like jaw dropper of a book, just in terms of how ambitious it is and how much they're going for. And, it's part of a monthly comics grind. So, of course, I think there's going to be moments that are a little clunkier here and there because it's not something that they have infinite time to work on. But overall, like I got to say, I was pretty impressed looking back at this book at how much the good moments did work well. But I'm really curious to hear your take on a lot of this, Chris, because we haven't really talked too much in detail about this story before. I think we talked about like, oh, this would be cool to talk about on the show. But I'm really curious kind of what your takeaway was reading all this stuff. And we can also jump into like actually describing the story soon for those who've not read the story before.
Haven't read it. I mean, look, I don't remember reading this book. I actually don't think I read this book when it came out, but I know the character from, I guess he was in Blue Beetle before this. They were saying in the letter column, and I'm pretty sure he showed up in Crisis. I don't know, like I'm familiar with the character. I just hadn't read this book, and again, I'm familiar with Cowan's art, and I'm familiar with a lot of stuff that Denny O'Neil wrote when he was writing other stuff. But this is, you're right, it's just such a different type of book. And when we talk about that, it's not that the storytelling is different, but the thing that makes it different really is the philosophy of the book is discussed in the captions. Like there's this it's an interesting way of like talk, because it's this interesting kind of third person discussion of what's happening. And I feel like there's a lot of, I think what's cool, and they get away from this, pretty quickly, but she hangs over the book as Lady Shiva, right? So she saves him at the end, but we'll get to what happens in the book, but she takes this guy Vic Sage and gets him on the path of being the question for really non-selfish reasons. And I think like very even like it's it's like interesting when she has this discussion with him when she says, I'm trying to find what your passion is, and your passion is for like curiosity,
right?
And it's like it's not for the violence, it's not this, and it's just, and it makes you understand that it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He's called the question, but he's already the question before that gets revealed to him, and and unless you know that he's going on this path of trying to solve, he's trying to answer questions about stuff, and it's interesting that he's a reporter, like it's that's his alter ego. I think it's interesting too that he's not doing this because of a typical superhero kind of like this might have been said in like the letter column. It might not have been in the book, but he's not doing it for typical reasons. Like there's no dead parents, there's no like there's no spider bite, there's no he's no millionaire, he's no alien, he's no like child of the gods. He's just a regular dude who has this mask that makes it you can't see his face, and he's trained because I think what's fascinating. Let's kind of jump into the first issue. The first issue begins, and the first caption is, like Charles Victor
Saz.
Like Saz, whatever his name is. He's got 25 hours to live. Yes. And it's just ticking clock. And then it's like you realize maybe like a little when he meets his partner Aristotle, his name is his name. His name is Charles Victor like Sage, but he goes by Victor Sage. And you're like, what does that mean? He's got so many hours. You got now you figure that one he's got like 10 hours left to live. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And then so the first issue, he's already questioned. He's doing some stuff. And he goes and he's trying to like stop this reverend who's connected with this milksop of a mayor, and he goes to meet he goes to essentially a trap, and gets his ass kicked, and he essentially gets killed. He's essentially killed.
Mm-hmm. He's basically killed. And we should describe for people who don't know the character that he's dressed up in this kind of opening sequence where he gets beaten pretty much to death. He's dressed up in a trench coat, which is like the classic Ditko costume, and a fedora, and he has no face. And that's basically the iconic look of the question is a man with no face. And it's a surprisingly effective, really simple design that feels really iconic. And so we see him in the trench coat and the fedora, and he's trying to do something with some fucking criminals on a dock somewhere where they're hiding out in a shack, and he wants some kind of videotape that they won't give him, and they get the drop on him, they outnumber him, and they basically seem like they're just, they beat him pretty badly.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like he doesn't survive this assault, and he gets thrown into this icy waters at the end of the first issue, and it's like, oh, and he's dead. He's dead, and it kind of coincides with like here we are, with like it's like he gets thrown into the water and says, oh, there's like 2 minutes left for this guy before he dies, and then he floats to the bottom of the water and it says, oh, it's 10 minutes past his death. And you're like, damn, this motherfucker's dead, and then the issue ends. I mean, it's and it's like it's really interesting the way he gets. Like your main character is killed, essentially killed at the end of the first issue, and I think that's pretty cool. And
it's also a dope metaphor for like what's going to happen here to Vic Sage, right? He's on this journey of discovery and spiritual metamorphosis and all that, and I think the other players kind of on the board in the first issue are that we meet. You mentioned Lady Shiva, and Lady Shiva is like an Asian woman who's working with these criminals, but she's kind of mysterious and she's a fighter herself, and we don't really know what her motivations are, but she's clearly more sympathetic in a way toward the Question or Vic Sage than these other criminals are who he's fighting. And Vic Sage himself, like you said, is a reporter at a news station, and we realize that his co-lead broadcaster on the news is this woman Myra,
right?
And she's this beautiful woman who Vic clearly has some kind of chemistry with. So I mention her because we see that Vic also is having a romantic relationship with her, and we see a little bit of them together in this first issue, kind of waking up in the morning together. And so Vic's got a relationship with this woman, Myra, who he knows from work. They're both news broadcasters. This is going to be critical as we move forward, though, because when Vic disappears and goes off to go do some training and he returns to Hub City, Myra is going to have a very different role in the city. And then the other character you mentioned, Aristotle, who's like Vic's kind of like his best friend and slash like quasi mentor. He's not his only mentor, but he's sort of like a very spiritual minded older man who's constantly speaking in these like Zen sort of truisms and just kind of talking to Vic the way that, you know, like Mr. Miyagi talks to Daniel in The Karate Kid almost. Like he's forcing Vic to question things about himself or his assumptions. And, you know, I had the strong sense looking back and reading the issue this time that I wonder if that character of Aristotle who goes by the name Tot, I wonder how much Denny O'Neil saw of himself in that character, because I think O'Neil probably was around a similar age to that character, Tot. At the time he was writing this, he was like, I'm guessing like a man in his 50s or 60s who'd seen a little bit of life and was probably like looking back on things with a little bit more of a philosophical eye. And so I don't know what the answer is to that, but I did have the thought that Denny O'Neil really might have seen a part of himself in that character of Tot.
Well, I think that's an interesting observation because I think it's weird when reading comics because you think of all the creators of being kind of in their like 30s and 40s. You know?
Or younger, or 20s even,
or younger. Like you don't think there's these older men who've lived life to bring a different kind of life perspective to the comic. And it's fascinating that you say that because, you know, I know that you were reading these digitally, which you didn't like, and you missed the letter column.
I was really pissed about that, yes.
But see, here's what's interesting about the letter column, and this kind of harkens back to what we were talking about when we talked about the Nexus, is that at the end of the letter column, there is a, you know, recommended reading by, you know, like Denny O'Neil. So last thing
I remember this
in the letter column before it's over, and he's always suggesting these high-end kind of like philosophical books. Like I remember there was one where he's suggesting like this fascinating book that I think that every writer should read. It's called The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim. And I first heard about this book when I was reading an interview with the her name is Diane something or other. She's the co-writer of The Shining. And she was saying that Kubrick gave her this book when they started working together.
Oh wow. Oh shit.
And it's because Kubrick said that I want in the book, not in the movie, but they shot it but cut it out of the movie, was there was this it's a photo album that was the corrupting device of Jack Torrance. In the book, he grabs it, and it's all the photographs and all that, you know, that thing at the end where you see him parting at the back, and it's got all these kind of photographs of like these different kind of eras of the Overlook. And he was saying that in that book, the Uses of Enchantment, it's a breakdown of where enchanted items are used in various types of storytelling. And there's this thing called like the poison apple, which we know from like Snow White, but that comes out of Russia. And he talks about how that's it's really not just the apple, but it's a gift. Like whenever you get a gift that is going to fuck with you, that you think is going to be good, is going to fuck with you, is the poison apple. And it comes out of, and that's in that book. That's one of the enchanted things that's in that Bruno Bettelheim book. And I read that, and I was like, that's fucking amazing type of like storytelling, because when you do stuff like that, you're tapping into something. Like fairy tales are like these longer tales that are part of a culture that kind of have this like, what's that Carl Jung calls it, like the collective unconscious.
Right,
the culture is very aware of these things, and even though you're not told, it's just shown up so many times, so many different stories. And that's why I mentioned, it's like a Snow White. Like in Snow White, you remember, Snow White, that apple that she gets from the witch who wants to kill her, like she eats it and bites it, and then she's put into the trance. It's like that's what all that shit is. And I was like, why did he put this as a recommended reading in the back of the question?
I love that.
I mean, that I think just says, because the Loricom doesn't really begin to like the third issue, something like that. Obviously, with most new comics, the first two are them just, what if they have Loricoms at all, they're just talking about how the book came together, or just weird kind of commentators by the creators. But once the letter song starts coming in, he starts putting those recommended readings in there. But it just but it tells you again, he's a very well-read writer, and he quotes a lot of stuff in this book. I mean, there was one issue later on, like issue 8, when he's talking about like the Gilbert and Sullivan opera. And It's just like he's really drawing a lot of like influences and not just but ideas from things in literature in a way that you don't expect in comics. Now that became more of the norm, and like there was Vertigo books, obviously, and then what's that one book that James Robinson did? Starman. Yeah, because he did that too. He was just lacing his book with stuff that he was reading, and somehow was able to make it fit within the context of the story without being like some sort of like, hello kids, I have a lesson to teach you kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Yes, it actually worked. And we should mention here, I think, because like I think you touched on it briefly, and I think we started to talk about it before, but we had some technical problems, and we've had a couple of false starts to the episode today. So I think we should be really clear to everyone that this is very pre-Vertigo, that this book existed in a DC Comics where Vertigo Comics had not come into being. And in a lot of ways, the books like The Question and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, I think, were really kind of like the proof of concepts for the idea that there was a need or a desire for these types of literary comics in this space, that we're still dealing with genre fiction, but like you say, bringing a much more kind of elevated, mature, kind of literary eye to this material. And I think Denny O'Neil, I don't know that he often gets the credit that he deserves, although he's like a well-regarded, legendary writer, editor in a lot of ways. I really think this book, The Question, was a seminal book for a lot of creators and a lot of people who saw like, wow, you could really push things in a direction that went a lot deeper and a lot further than comics were doing at that time. And I remember, Chris, when I was a kid, like I was really fucking young reading The Question. Came out in 86, 87. So I was literally like 9-10 years old when this first issue came out, and I read every issue off the rack. So I was reading it for the next 3 years, from the time I was like 9 or 10 till I was 12 or 13. I read the whole run monthly, and I was obsessed with The Question. And Denny O'Neil's recommended reading was something as a kid that I remember like thinking about, and I went out and I bought fucking Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Because Denny O'Neil recommended it. And as a kid, I don't think I got too far into it. But, looking back, just how cool is that Denny O'Neil was planting seeds for these kinds of like Eastern ideas, these spiritual sort of philosophical concepts in the minds of kids like me who were reading these books. And where else was I going to get exposed to this stuff? Like I wasn't going to get exposed to it anywhere else, certainly not in popular media at that time. No. And that's what was so fucking cool about comics. And that's why your Denny O'Neil's, and also, of course, your Alan Moore's, your Grant Morrison's, all these writers back then, they were dropping these little idea bombs and these little thought bombs into the minds of unsuspecting kids. And, I for sure was one of those kids. And for me, it had a huge impact on just what I expected out of stories and the possibilities for what I saw you could do with these stories.
Well, the thing about this being what it's like 5 years before Vertigo. And I think the only book.
I'm not sure if it was that. I don't know. I'll check that. We'll keep talking. I'm going to look that up.
I think Vertigo was 91, right? 91 or 92. And if this is it's 86. It's at least, I think it's 4 or 5 years. At least it might be longer than Vertigo. But I think the only book that was similar in kind of like graphic tone was the book Vigilante.
Oh, that's an interesting point. And actually, you're totally right. Vertigo didn't start, according to Wikipedia, until 93. So that's actually later than I thought. This is way before.
So this is 7 years before Vertigo. Yeah, 7 years before Vertigo. This book comes out. And you have to, and it's interesting because reading it now, like, it's hard to imagine. And this is the thing that I kind of love to do is I kind of love to look at a piece of artwork like this, like a movie or TV show or a comic, and try to imagine what it was like when it originally came out. Like what was the impact of this work when it hit people? Because a lot of times, because you might read this now and be like, yeah, what's so special about this? Totally. But it's like, but you got to realize that in '86. There was no books coming out like this.
Oh no, this was groundbreaking. And I think Vigilante was a really interesting book, and that's a book I would actually like for us to talk about here sometime, because that was like kind of a batshit crazy book in its own way also, but I think that what the question brought to things that Vigilante didn't as much in my memory is the question brought this more kind of like literary, but also like just the spiritual philosophical bent that was so interesting that I think came out of Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan, both, as far as I know, being students of the martial arts in real life. And so they're both people who are martial artists. And I know I heard an interview with Denny O'Neil at some point, that was near the end of his life, where he was talking about how he was seeing an acupuncturist, and it sounds like he had a lifelong respect and interest in sort of Eastern philosophies and ways of looking at things. And I think that's a really unique thing that Cowan and O'Neil brought to this book. And it really points to why they were so perfect to do this story. And it's funny, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, Denny O'Neil originally was going to be doing this book with another artist, and it was going to be Ernie Colon, the legendary artist in his own right, who's done a ton of stuff. And for scheduling reasons, deadline reasons, Ernie wasn't able to do it. And Dennis Cowan got called into Dick Giordano's office one day, and we're getting this from an interview we read with Dennis Cowan himself. He said he was offered this book just sort of through happenstance, and really it could not have been more fateful and more perfect, because I honestly can't think of an artist who would have been more perfectly suited for this book than Dennis Cowan. And I think that him and O'Neil, it seems like they had a true partnership. Like they did this book, not only did they do the full run of this book together, although the inker changed from Rick Magyar to Malcolm Jones III about halfway through the run. But then they came back even after the initial run was over. And I think O'Neil and Cowan, just the two of them, did like 4 or 5 issues of this giant size book that was called The Question Quarterly, where they were just releasing these huge 60-page stories. And those are also fascinating in their own right, because that was the first time that I saw Dennis Cowan inking himself. And the art on those was actually beautiful and really gorgeous in a different way. And Cowan's work had become a lot more just loose and really unique in a lot of ways. So I actually loved the way he pushed his art ultimately when he started inking it. But him and O'Neil, my point being, him and O'Neil had a true partnership and collaboration, the likes of which you don't see that often in comics, where two guys told one character's story for really the equivalent of, I don't know, over 40 issues together. And it's a very sizable and significant run. So I think it's amazing.
I mean, I think the fact that you said they're both martial artists, and to be a good martial artist, no, I'm taking that back. To be a dedicated martial artist, you got to get into the philosophy of the martial arts, which is a lot of this kind of stuff that filters into like what's going on in the question and the questions that are posed to Vic Sage as he's going through this. And you're right. You know what? I remember the question like quarterly, like more than this book. That's what I remember. And you're right. It's like interesting looking at Dennis's art in this, because I was telling you earlier when we first got on earlier, it's like, there's so much of, at least to me, it looks like Paul Galassi and kind of like the form that he's doing here. I was cool when we were talking, the interview we read with him, is he was saying that like he was learning so much as an artist. And, you know, when he was talking with Howard Chaykin, and Chaykin was telling him, hey, man, like, you don't worry about like drawing the figures and getting the figures right. Like, think about everything as like shapes. Think about like, and design the page, not the panel. And I was like, that's actually really dope. Because I just want to like kind of harken back to, I mean, jump ahead a little bit. I don't know what issue it was. It was maybe issue 5 or something like that. I think it's issue 5, where there's a riot going on in Hub City.
Oh yeah.
You know? And him and Tot are driving around town, and he's like, oh my God, just look ahead, you know. And it's like it's at the bottom right of one page of the spreads, you know, and you turn to the next page, it was on the top left of the next page, and they're looking at like this looting going on, you know. But what's fascinating is he's got a character in the extreme foreground that's covering up like half the page with an arm going across, you know, and it's like blue. And I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool, because he didn't want to draw all of this like people in the background of craziness going on. He just wanted to show you like the sense of like chaos, but he could control it better by putting something in the extreme foreground that was kind of like, you know, like maximize your eye attention, but not with a lot of detail, because it's all kind of blued out, and as opposed to the other stuff is more detail. It's interesting how you see how he progresses as an artist.
I see the page you're talking about here. I just pulled it up. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. It is actually really fascinating, because he draws that one arm in the foreground in extreme kind of detail, and he's got also some kind of like duoshade or like zipatone or something on it. And then you see a whole lot of chaos and a lot of people looting sort of in various like sort of levels behind the guy. But that interesting the way that arm draws so much attention, and it's like a really chaotic sort of movement and motion of that character.
Right. And it also allows so he doesn't have to draw too much on that page. Like he draws a lot, because that arm wasn't there. He'd have to draw like storefronts getting looted and
you're right.
But so it works. It helps him economize what's happening with the art on the page and draw your eye more effectively. Because I think the guys like he was saying that Shaken was saying to him, you know, this I think this is interesting. I was just thinking about this. It's like a lot of times when you think about an artist in a comic book, you think about you might acquaint him to the cinematographer of a movie or a TV show.
Right.
But I think it's more than that. I think he's the director and the cinematographer.
It's so much more than that. He's the director, he's the cinematographer, he's the costume designer, or he or she is the production designer. I mean, it's like, you know, the artist has to do so much. And yes, the writer is the screenwriter, if you want to do the movie metaphor, the movie analogy, but the artist is everything else. Like the artist is the actors, you know, the actors, the casting director, everything. And that's why comic artists, like we've talked about this a lot, comic artists don't get enough credit for the incredible level of difficulty that their job, you know, requires of them, and the incredibly high degree of facility you have to have at all these things to be an incredible comic artist. The degree of difficulty, frankly, is very high. And like, as someone who has attempted to both draw comics and also has written movies myself, like I would say that the degree of difficulty for me, at least, I would say it's much higher if you're talking about putting together this whole comic book by yourself. A screenplay, it's difficult. It's not necessarily easy, but the amount of things you have to be good at, to me, doesn't feel quite as daunting as the amount of things you have to get good at as a comic book artist. Like it's
for sure.
It's an extraordinary amount of stuff you've got to be great at to be a master cartoonist, and I think most people just don't realize because they have no concept of it.
They have no concept because, but you know what? It goes back to, I think we're talking about this maybe with like the episode when we were talking about Mr. Monster. We were talking about, but it's like, it's about like how you design the page. It's not when they talk about the portfolio review and who's gonna, because maybe he says in an interview how when like they were looking at like Bill Sienkiewicz's portfolio when he first came on the scene. I think Neil Adams was looking at it. The thing about being a cartoonist is not just being able to do the illustrative art. It's being able to design the page, to understand how the panels fit as a shape and as a method of storytelling, and just like the panel itself was going, the composition in the panel, and then the composition of the page composition of the 7, 8, 2, 3, 1, 15, 19, whatever it is. Like those panels
All the
have to be
storytelling
laid out in a way
stuff
too that helps you like guide the eye around. And then you got to have the letterer come in, and it's got to he got to place those letters, those letter balloons in the right place to guide your eye to tell you where to read, every time. I think there's a few times in this where the lettering kind of confused me. I was like,
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Oh wait, it's what panel I got to look at next? Oh, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that to me, I think is one of the detractors of this. But I think it's because I think they needed like a better letterer on this, because what Dennis is doing art wise is very complicated.
Yeah,
and he makes it look easy. I mean, like the fight scenes are really fantastic.
Oh, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
You could tell that, again, like he is a fighter in real life, because he gets these kind of angles and these kind of like these body gestures and movements and stuff that aren't, particularly like when he like fights Lady Shiva in issue 2 or something like that. It's very like, oh, this guy really knows everything. And it was interesting that he was saying in the interview or something like that there wasn't going to be any sound effects in this book.
Yeah, so and it's hard.
So there's no like explosion, boom, bam, shotgun. There's no punch sound or anything like that. And Dennis is like, that made it so you had to be so much more clearer with what you're drawing on the page, because you're not getting any other crutches. And it's fascinating to look at the artwork like that. It's just really good. But I think that's also a testament of like what Denny O'Neil trying to say with his script. It's like, I'm trying to tell like this dual-handed story where it's like, I gotta like infect your thinking brain as well as your physical brain. I mean, like your visual brain, like with what I'm trying to tell you, and still keep it simple and flowing, because it flows really. I mean, like we were talking before about like sometimes these 80s books, they have a lot to say, and there is a lot to say in this book, but it doesn't seem overwhelming at all or like verbose, because the artwork is so fluid, and the way it kind of like lays out on the page and how he's telling a story. It's really fascinating. I mean, I guess we should jump into the issues, because
we should.
The details I want to talk about are about things that happen like per issue.
Yeah, we should totally get into the plot, because I think we always jump past the plot because we're so excited about to talk about the other stuff. Yeah, I just want to touch on the one thing you said about the sound effects, though, because the sound effects and the lack of them was such a jarring and original thing for me when I was a kid reading these comics, because it was so noticeable. And that's one of those things today that maybe you've seen other comics do that by this point, and so it may not be as big a deal to a reader today. But back then, that was a jaw-dropping thing to read a quote-unquote action-heavy comic where there were no sound effects, and you had people not only getting punched and kicked, but people getting shot with no sound effects. And that was something you did not see. I don't think there was a single book that I can think of in mainstream comics that did this before Cowan and O'Neil did it with The Question. And one thing that was funny looking back at this also, Chris, was that there were sound effects, I believe, in just like one issue. I think it was like the first or the second issue, there were some very light sound effects. And then after that, they decided to do away with them completely. But I think it was the second time, actually it was issue number 2. I think it's the second time that Vic fights Lady Shiva after he goes through his training. I remember noticing that there was just like some very light sound effects. And I thought, oh, that issue. I don't know if it like the letterer just didn't get the memo that issue. Issue number 2, when the helicopter comes to pick up Vic to take him to his training, there's like whoop, 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 helicopter sound effects. And then Vic goes and does his training. And when he has that second fight with Lady Shiva, you'll see there's a crack, thap, pat, smack. Just on one page, though. And then on the next page, they fight a little more, and there's no sound effects on the next page. So I almost think it was a mistake. Looking at it now, is that they had sound effects on literally just 2 pages of issue 2. And I have to believe that might have been just a mistake. And then they were like, hey, yo, Gaspar, what the fuck are you doing here? Remember, no sound effects. And he was like, oh yeah, oops. So I think that might have...
it seems like that Mike Gold, he might have overlooked that when he was doing the final look. Not overlooked it, but it'd be easy to to forget that you had
Yeah.
sound effects because you're probably doing so many books. You go, okay, there is sound
Yeah,
effects here.
I think that's probably what it was. Like, poor Gaspar is probably doing lettering on 5 different books. Because, yeah, looking at the rest of issue 2, there's other punches and other kicks or whatever, and Vic getting thrown in the water, and there's no sound effects. So, yeah, I think it was probably just a mix-up on that one page or two.
Right. So okay, so we talked about issue 1 where we meet Vic Sage, meet the players, the Reverend Tot. You know, he gets his ass. I mean, he gets his ass beat in a way. In the final 2 pages,
it's so bad.
Where it's like he gets hit in the head with a lead pipe.
Yeah,
I think
he's so dead.
4 times.
Yeah, he's fucking dead.
And what's crazy is, you know, there's a guy named Baby Gun or Brother Gun or something, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
He shoots Vic Sage in the face with the air gun.
Yeah, that was weird. Like, why an air gun?
Because he shoots someone else with the air gun too. But it's like, you know, this is something I bet you that Denny O'Neil read about, and he thought this might be kind of cool to use. It's like, I remember reading somewhere where a lot of times when police would get you into custody, they would put a phone book on you and then hit you with the billy club.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah,
you know, because then it's like you feel the hit of the billy club, but it doesn't leave a bruise because like the sheer like the real blunt force is being absorbed into the phone book, but you're still gonna feel like the kinetic energy. So I feel like this guy was doing the air gun to prevent, you know, from being a real gunshot, you know.
That's interesting because, yeah, I was a little confused by the air gun. I was also confused, while we're on that topic, by the incredible sort of overabundance of knives in Hub City as opposed to guns. And I was just like, oh, all right, well, this is interesting. Like, every single sort of hoodlum or street criminal that Vic encounters, everyone's got a fucking switchblade or a knife. And I was surprised by the relative paucity of firearms in Hub City for a city that's so out of control. I was just like, wow, everyone's running around with fucking knives. Like,
yeah, I mean, there's not knives on the street. I mean, enough people like have guns, but it just seemed kind of. You're right. Well, that's interesting too. I think, you know, like you always think about, what is the analog city for this city?
Mm-hmm.
And of a you know, Fawcett City or Central City, these things,
right.
these DC comic things.
Yeah.
And I feel like Hub City is either like Cleveland or maybe like Buffalo or maybe Detroit.
Detroit is what I was thinking. Like a city that's been like ravaged by lack of industry that used to be something special, but now it's like fallen into disrepair and the rest of the country doesn't seem to care. And like it's a war, and it's considered a war zone that's been abandoned or whatever.
Yeah, because I feel like, you know, because it's wintertime in this thing, and there's that one issue where they talk about, I think issue 4 or 5 or 6, where they talk about the origin of the city, and it's like, you know, it was time with the settlers and stuff like that. I was like, oh, this is such a weird. It's not number one. It's not an East Coast city. It's not a West Coast city. It's a city in the middle of the country where there is a lake. So it's got to be either Cleveland or Detroit, possibly Buffalo, but I think Cleveland or Detroit, which is an interesting place to have it because I remember when I was growing up in Cleveland, you didn't hear about guns a lot. You heard about knives a lot.
Oh,
you know, I mean,
that's so interesting.
You know, you heard about guns a little bit, but knives and stuff was more of how people kind of handle things, and getting guns and stuff was more of like, you know, like a West Coast thing or East Coast thing. It's interesting to see that was the play in this.
That's fascinating.
Then, you know, okay, so we talk about issue 1. Yeah, I mean, so in issue 2, like we said, so
Vic's dead.
He's dead, but he's not dead.
Yeah,
he's actually been saved by Lady Shiva. And she's rescued his body, and they explain some weird kind of way where he could have survived drowning. They mentioned some little
it was something called like the diving reflex, the diving reflex. Tot says there's a phenomenon called the diving reflex. It kept a little girl in New York alive for nearly 3/4 of an hour. Stored oxygen keeps the brain from dying, even if the rest of the life systems stop. It only works in cold water and only very rarely. Nobody understands why, but nothing to count on next time you're in trouble at the beach. So that's kind of a cool little detail.
It's cool detail. I'm assuming he read about that somewhere, and he wanted to put in here to help with the story, because otherwise you are going to quickly be out of this book. Like, what the hell's going on?
Totally.
He got his head broken and he got shot in the face, and he still survived. But then the rest of the story is, him in the bed, and then him going to train at this guy named Richard's place. Is that his name, Richard?
Yeah, it's Richard Dragon, who is like, from
wait, this is Richard Dragon?
That's Richard Dragon from the DC Comics fucking mythology. Yes, that's Richard fucking Dragon.
This is Richard Dragon.
Yes, that is Richard Dragon. That is who the question goes to train with. The resident martial arts master of the DC universe.
Wait, but do they call him Richard Dragon in this?
I don't know if they call him Richard Dragon, but they call him Richard. And I'm pretty positive that I've read, or I remember reading elsewhere, or maybe even in later issues of the question, that was Richard Dragon.
That's fascinating, because there was like a book. He had his own book in the 70s.
Yeah, he did.
He was a member of the League of Assassins.
Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure he was, because one of my favorite DC characters is the Bronze Tiger. And the Bronze Tiger, he made his first appearance in one of these Richard Dragon issues. And I remember I bought I think maybe 8 to 12 issues. I hunted them down.
Yeah,
of these Richard Dragon kung fu things to read the Bronze Tiger origin and stuff like that. I didn't even know that was Richard Dragon.
Yeah. No, it's definitely Richard Dragon. I just looked up some other reviews of this question series online, and I'm reading someone reviewing this elsewhere, talking about how Aristotle Rodor represents science and reason in this story, while Richard Dragon represents a mystical worldview. So this is it is interesting how they're working in the DC universe in a way into the story, because Vic is having dreams of Batman. He goes to train with Richard Dragon, but at the same time, the story feels so unlike a DC comic in any sense.
Yeah, and then after he spends probably 6-9 months training,
which goes by very fast in the comic.
Yeah, but they do that cool thing they do on I don't know what page this is. Maybe it's a page. Let me see what it says. I can't see.
Is it the montage page?
Yeah, the montage page is like page 18.
Yeah,
like that's like a little page I've seen in Jim Steranko did something like this in like an old Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the 60s. Kind of covered all this kind of time passage in a single page like this, and it's really fascinating. It's something, again, that the only comics can do something like that. There's other ways to do montages for sure, but to do it all on a single page, and there's all this kind of there's a conversation about the philosophy of things, and that he gives that metaphor about the man who dreams is a butterfly, the butterfly who's dreaming is the man.
I love that.
And then he kind of gets, and then to graduate from his time, he's going to fight like Lady Shiva again. Now, I want to say that Lady Shiva was part of the League of the Assassins too, because when is it Jason Todd? There's the third Robin. The third Robin. I can't remember what it was. I forget who the third Robin is. But
there was Jason Todd. Before that was Dick Grayson. Tim Drake. Yeah, Tim Drake.
Okay,
yeah.
So Tim Drake was trained by Lady Shiva too.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah,
shit! Yeah, I didn't know that.
That's how he knows how to fight.
Wait a second. Okay, this is interesting. Wikipedia says Lady Shiva was co-created by Denny O'Neil and Rick Estrada, and Lady Shiva first appeared in Richard Dragon Kung Fu Fighter #5. It all comes together.
There you go. See?
That's fascinating. Okay, so Lady Shiva, she's a martial arts grandmaster. She's also an assassin for hire, and wait a second. and she specializes in killing her targets with her bare hands, and she's the mother of Cassandra Cain, a.k.a. Batgirl. And what? Yeah. I didn't know all this. I didn't realize all this about Lady Shiva. I just kind of knew Lady Shiva from The Question. I didn't realize her tentacles reached into the whole DC universe like this. Wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah, they go deep. They go deep. So it's interesting seeing her in this book because, like, she's one of my favorite characters. Because I remember, like, when that Tim Drake Robin came out, I was kind of like, oh, this is she's in at least the first 3 issues. And she's popping up to trade him. I was like, oh, this is a fucking cool as shit character. And I didn't realize until I got some of those Richard Dragon comics that she'd been around for at least since at least 20, 25 years.
I didn't read a lot of that Tim Drake Robin stuff. I think I was kind of checked out of that Robin stuff at that time. And so I didn't realize Lady Shiva's involvement. This is super interesting. Yeah, The Question.
I tell you what's funny about Tim Drake's Robin is that, like, I didn't read Batman. I read the Robin book for most of the time.
Shit!
So my way to understand what's going on in the Batman universe was to read Robin because he would intersect with him all the time. Plus, I kind of felt like he was an interesting character. It was a new launch on the Robin kid, and Batman is always like is a little. It's a little inscrutable to me as a character, because there's no personality in Bruce Wayne.
Right.
I think it's pretty, it's I don't know. It's not as interesting. Like he's just Batman.
Sure.
Like there's no other. It's kind of like Captain America, where Captain America's. He's never Steve Rogers. He is, but he never really is.
They almost are just the icon of that character. Like, it's hard to say, it's hard to write like an idiosyncratic Steve Rogers or an idiosyncratic Batman, because that wouldn't quite be who they are. Like, they're these big symbolic figures that represent, pain and trauma and loss and, revenge, vengeance, or patriotism and the best of us in America, blah, blah, blah. But you're right. They feel like ideas even more than they feel like characters almost.
Yeah. It's interesting to this Richard Dragon and fucking Lady Shiva.
It's deep with Easter eggs apparently for people who want to look for that stuff. It's there more than we realize. I just want to also call out too before we move on to issue 3, because issue 2 we've covered most of it here with kind of the training. Vic Sage disappears from Hub City after Lady Shiva rescues him, and he goes off and trains with Richard Dragon, becomes something of a martial arts master, and then has to fight Shiva again. But before that, issue number 2 opens with some of that sort of philosophy stuff we've been talking about. And I just wanted to read a couple of the captions at the opening here. And again, to point out, this is so different than anything that existed in comics at that time in 86. Like, if one were to read the opening pages of the other fucking 15 DC comics that came out this week, none of them would read like this. So the opening question, issue number 2, it's this incredible full-page illustration of, like, Vic Sage in black and white from behind, looking like he's facing just, like, an incredible, I don't know, like a burst of light and darkness. It's like some light piercing through some darkness. It's a very striking full-page splash page image. The title of the issue is Butterfly, and the caption that opens it says, "This is the secret the dead learn. Time is an illusion. When he was alive, Charles Victor Zaz thought he knew time, but really, all he knew was motion and change in persons, places, and things. Time does not exist. In death, there is no motion, no change. So it is senseless to ask how long he has been floating toward the white light. An eternal moment, a fleeting eternity, no difference, no matter. In life, he had been a creature of turmoil, of violence. Now at last, he is at peace." And so then it goes on with the rest of the story, but like that's a pretty heady sort of introductory page to this comic about the crime fighter with no face. It's like pretty heavy stuff. And then that beautiful Steranko-like splash page that you referenced, which comes like 15 pages later, O'Neil returns to that same caption mechanic. And over that lovely page where we see Vic training for the next year with Richard Dragon, now we come back to these words again, and we hear, "Time, being an illusion, is infinitely malleable. It can be stretched. It can be contracted. A wise man dreamed he was a butterfly. When he awoke, he had a strange realization. He realized that he didn't know if he was a man who had been dreaming he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was a man. And that's the end of the training montage. And as we get to the end of that, Richard Dragon says, okay, school's out.
Yeah, you're done.
You're done. That's it. That's it. And it's really cool to me the way that O'Neil dips in and out of these really heady, pondering, sort of searching, yearning captions, talking about these massive concepts of life, these sort of existential questions. But he's not beating you over the head every page with it, which would get exhausting. It's like he dips in and out of it, and then we get back to some fighting or some craziness in Hub City or whatever. But it's really fascinating how O'Neil kind of dips in and out of this stuff. And I think it's really what makes the question feel like it's got weight to it. And there's some substance to this book where it's really saying a lot more than any comic was attempting to say at that time. Hey there, folks. Sorry to interrupt your listening experience. This is Steve and Chris, and we just wanted to butt in for a moment to ask y'all to please consider contributing to the Comics Rot Your Brain Patreon campaign. We got an amazing Patreon family that's growing and growing by leaps and bounds every week. We appreciate every last one of you because it means the world to us if y'all can support the Patreon. It's only $2 a month, and it really helps make things easier over here at CRYB Central, where we're paying the bills for all of the massive equipment we have to use and all of the incredible travel costs and all the various fees we incur here to bring you the CRYB experience. If you can please consider the $2 a month. We are not just begging for money. We're offering you a ton of free content, including 2 bonus episodes every month, 2 bonus solo one-shot episodes where Chris and I will cover books that we find compelling and intriguing that we're not going to be talking about on the main show. So you'll get 2 free episodes, and you're going to get some other stuff as well. Chris, what else do they get for only $2 a month? What else are we offering?
Well, if you become a Patreon subscriber, part of the membership, part of the community, you will be able to suggest what book we might read or that we will read next season, the following season. You know, the subscribers will get this, you know, will submit suggestions, and we'll read a book and we'll go, okay, this is like one that the subscribers said we should take a look at, and we'll give it the Comics Rot Your Brain treatment, and then everyone will be super excited, and so will us. So there's that. The second thing is you'll be able to send us questions for our exclusive Q&A episode that will either happen between seasons or within the season. Not sure yet. Depends on how fast we get questions. Depends how many people support the show, considering we have a lot of subscribers already. And that's what we're going to get for $2 a month. Now, Steve, tell me what book you might cover in your one-shot.
Okay, now this might be a twofer. I'm not sure which one of these books I'll cover. Possibly both. They're by the same creator, though, same writer-artist. The cartoonist that I'm referencing here is none other than Eddie Campbell, the esteemed collaborator of Alan Moore on From Hell. Now, Eddie Campbell's done a lot of stuff on his own prior to From Hell, after From Hell. The 2 books in particular I really found quite striking that left an impression on me when I read them initially, and I'd like to go back to them. He wrote a book called The Fate of the Artist, I believe, that was literally a memoir and a document of his time as a professional artist and the struggle that it had been both financially and personally for him to keep going with his dream and his life path of being an artist. It's an incredibly frank and honest depiction of Eddie Campbell's life, and it's a book I haven't heard enough people really talk about, but I found it really compelling and also just like personally kind of moving and inspirational in different ways. I wanted to talk about that. And then he had a little bit of a companion piece to that I think he did a few years later called The Lovely Horrible Stuff, which is all about his specific relationship with money and being an artist and a person in the world, and how his dealings with money and finances have impacted his life and his art, etc. So those 2 books are kind of like companion pieces to each other, and I read them maybe a decade apart, but they both sort of left a real imprint on me, and I'd love to revisit them maybe back to back and talk a bit more about Eddie Campbell and just sort of like the public statements he's made about being an artist and pursuing that path in a world where you got to balance capitalism and resources and all these more kind of mundane, quotidian, but yet essential concerns with the more highfalutin concerns of being an artist and wanting to put out some important quote-unquote work. I think it's really a fascinating discussion that he's kind of opened up to an audience, and so I'd love to talk about those books.
It's pretty fascinating because I don't know too many artists who speak so frankly about their personal problems. You know,
yeah.
I mean, sure, there's that. There's that Gil Kane episode we're gonna do about the interview, and he goes fucking insane. But it's really rare.
Yes,
but it's
it is rare.
And it's,
yes,
and I'm looking forward to seeing this Eddie Campbell work, because you're right. It's so hard to balance the money and then to deal with the sacrifices you got to make. It's really fucking insane. Really, really insane. What am I going to talk about? You know what?
Good question.
What I've always wanted to revisit, and I remember it was a tough book to get at the time, but I remember it. I want to revisit the first story arc of the original Elemental series that Mikado published. Because I remember that being like those first 4 or 5 issues were like so, like, it was pretty brutal, it was pretty violent, you know, in a way that was like shocking for comics at the time. And I would love to talk about that. First, I just want to reread it. So that's what I might talk about, because I kind of love all those old comic code books like Fish Police and shit like that. So
yeah,
it'd be cool to go back and take a look at that book, because I don't know.
I love that. I love that. I would love to hear your take on the early Elementals. That's a book that I never spent as much time with as I would have liked. It kind of slipped between the cracks for me mostly, but I'd love to hear your take on the Elementals. I think Bill Willingham's obviously a significant creator who's made a real impact on so much stuff, and that whole company, Kamiko, however the fuck you say it. I've heard people say it both ways, but they put out some fantastic comics, and you're right, they are very much forgotten in the modern era. But I mean, they were publishing fucking Grendel. You know, they were a major player. They were a major player in the indie comic scene. You know, there's a Facebook group out there for Kamiko, and I joined the Facebook group a while ago, and it's been cool to see people just reminiscing. Some of the people who were like principals in the company too, reminiscing about just the old covers and the books and memories. And yeah, man, that's actually one of those companies that I would love for us to kind of do more of a deep dive on their whole line, because there were a lot of really interesting books that publisher was putting out, including Fish Police, you said, you know, I think, and there was quite a few others.
Yeah, there's a few others. Yeah, so listeners, support our Patreon. We would love it if you did. We would just love it. It'd make things so good. It's only $2 a month, which is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money. And we would appreciate it, as Steve has said, as I'm saying. And now it's time for us to get back to Comics Rot Your Brain. You know what? I completely agree with you on that, and what he's trying to do and what he's trying to say, and you know, and it's how he's shaping this character. You know, it's kind of like, how is he creating this character for us now? Because it's not an origin story, but it's a way to, like, well, I have to tweak his origin. He's been around for a little bit, but like, as the creator, this is me and Cowan are going to create this character, and let's create him in our mold so he can start telling the stories that we want to tell with him, as opposed to what was there before. Yes, I think that's part of why he goes through this training thing, because that Batman thing that might have been a dream, might have been real, because he did meet Batman earlier, was to tell him that you can only do this if you do it full time. Right, you can't do it. You can't half-ass doing this type of work, because you get yourself killed. This is when he's already had his head broken in and his whole body broken up and shit like that.
Yeah, seems like good advice from Batman.
Yeah, potentially drowned and shit like that. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. You know. Yeah, so then later on in the book, halfway through the book, you know, 2/3 of the book, he has this fight with Lady Shiva, you know, and it's interesting because she never tells him why she saved him. No, know, because she was part of the she was part of the gang that she helped beat his ass. Right. You know, so it's kind of like, what the hell? And then, and then he goes back home after, like, I don't know how long he's been gone, but he starts to be the question again. I mean, he's got the mask, because apparently it's like Aristotle was the one who designed the faceless mask that sticks to his face, and the belt with this weird gas that changes his suit coloring. It's a very I don't say it's a very peculiar, because it's like, if he's not like Alfred, but what I'm saying, he's not like, but because he's really the one behind like how the technology works,
right?
But he's not. It's a weird, like, that duo is very. It's kind of like, is different than most comics.
It is, yeah, and the Tot character is really interesting, and I remember him making a big impression on me as a kid. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a storyline that comes up later on in the run of the question where Tot gets kidnapped by some of Vic's enemies, and I remember being shocked by that as a kid too, because Tot had been such a gentle, kind of peaceful character, and suddenly he's pulled into this world of violence himself. But yeah, he's a unique character. You're right. He's given a lot more agency than like an Alfred character. And Vic seems to respect him and see him more as like a father figure in a way, but yet it's a father figure who he's not going to always listen to. But Tot is kind of like the voice of reason, telling Vic to, like, stop being so hard on yourself, get some sleep, you're going to kill yourself, be careful, all that stuff. Like Tot clearly cares about Vic. And Vic himself,
yeah.
And Vic's been very alone his whole life. He hasn't had a whole lot of people to care about him. His backstory, like, it's pretty sad and minimal. He was an orphan, apparently, at an orphanage, and there was some mention in this in these issues here. You might remember this, but they were talking at some point about when Vic was brought to the orphanage, and this kind of shocked me. It said something about, I think, that he was like 6 months old, but that the baby that was brought to the orphanage had like the signs of abuse on the baby, like that there was like burn marks or some sort of abuse that had happened to the baby that was Vic Sage when he was brought to the orphanage. And it was just like a little detail that was mentioned when Vic was talking about his childhood. But I just, reading that, I was like, whoa, that is really heavy. If O'Neil is suggesting that Vic Sage's parents or whoever was raising him as a baby was literally, like, I'll try and find it, but it was something about how this child showed up as a baby at the orphanage already with the telltale signs of some horrific abuse. And then, at the orphanage, he went through further hell, and he was bullied, terrorized, and then there was incredible cruelty from the nuns at the orphanage. So Vic Sage's childhood was a horror show.
Oh yeah, there's that really great montage when it's like, when he's showing him as a kid, and it's like the nuns are whooping his hands and shit like that with rulers and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I can't remember. I think that's in issue 4, maybe, or I think it's issue 4, maybe issue 3, issue 4. This is like when he later finds out he's come back after the 6 months, maybe he's even longer, maybe it's been a year away, and he finds out that Myra, she's been forced to marry the mayor, who's a drunk and a figurehead for this terrible guy. Yeah, this crazy ass reverend. Who was interesting because, like, you read it about it. I'm reading it now, and I'm like, to have your villain for the first story arc be a deranged, Christian, is very. I mean, like, he's on the level of like a Taliban type of person.
He's trying to sacrifice children.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of stuff in these comics in terms of like the victim characters are it's pretty heinous. It's pretty like, this is, there's that old woman who almost gets fucking brutalized by those punks, and she's got to sit outside by the bus for like 6 hours.
Yeah.
There's that guy who tries to rape his secretary.
Or I think he does rape his secretary.
Well, he does.
And then he commits suicide. I mean, it goes to very dark places.
Yeah. This book does a lot of, again, 7 years before Vertigo.
Yeah.
Jumping in and doing this kind of intense stuff. And the preacher, the reverend, I mean, he's like, he was in Vietnam, and he gave up the cross in Vietnam and was just like slaughtering people wholesale. It's interesting. that this is how that this is the villain that he's gonna first attack or go up against is this kind of like, he's not a superhero villain, you know. I think the question does not deal with superhero villains. He deals with people who come out of like the corruption of an urban landscape.
Yeah.
You know? But the end of what I love at the end of issue 1 is he says, yeah, you know, this guy's not gonna come back to kill me unless he sings "Oh Danny Boy." And then,
right. And sure enough,
at the end of issue 2, the question shows up to confront the Reverend. He shows up and he's singing "Oh Danny Boy." And I was like,
that surprised me. Yeah.
I mean, that's like a good little that's a joke. It's a good callback, whatever the hell it is. But that was good. And that's, and the end of issue 2 is just like, okay, question meets the Reverend, you know?
Yes.
And he's like, hey, it's about to be us. It's about to be us against each other, like the mano y mano. Which is a great way to end that second issue.
And he is basically confronting the Reverend. Now, wait, are you on? Did you say issue 2?
Issue 2, yeah. Issue 2.
Okay.
The last page of issue 2, yeah.
Okay, so all right, just trying to make sure I'm there with you. So and he says, "I want you to pray, Reverend," and then issue 3 is kind of interesting because issue 3 now we have this other storyline that kind of pops up that's connected to the Reverend storyline, but for the moment we have a separate bad guy that Vic has to stop that has been hired by the Reverend to plant a bomb on a bus full of school children.
Yeah, now that to me was a bit shocking.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to say to myself...
what part of it?
Well, I say to myself, okay, here's the thing that's shocking, right? This was fucked up. This is how people like view... This is how the world really views shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're making it sound like we're going to blow up a bus of a school bus...
Mm-hmm.
And it's white kids from the suburbs.
Yep.
And we're going to blame it on a black guy.
That was the plan by the bad guy. Yeah.
I was like, God damn. That's like, and they do it because they know the black guy will get blamed like very, like, it's just like the scapegoating will be believed. And it's just shit.
No.
It's just.
Yeah. It's pretty jaw-dropping, and it's something like, you know, I know we talked a little bit off mic about this. It would be really just interesting to discuss with Dennis Cowan at some point just how he felt about the various racial politics at play in the question, because I'm sure it must be something him and Denny O'Neil must have talked about. But the fact that Cowan was a young black artist and Denny O'Neil was an older white man writer, and they were tackling some of the racial politics that they were tackling in this story quite, you know, head on and directly in a lot of ways. I'd be really fascinated to hear Dennis Cowan's take on how he felt about some of the issues and some of the material here. Because as we get further into the run, there are some issues that deal even more directly with the racial politics and the racism in Hub City. And, you know, they're not hiding from it. It's just one more of the horrors that they're going to deal with here in the story in Hub City.
Well, here's what's interesting. I'm looking at the cover of issue 2 and 3 and 1. No comic code authority on this book. So I kind of feel like they could have used the N-word and they didn't. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I mean, it might have been in the scripts earlier, and I bet that Dennis is like, he might have been like, I don't know if you can do that. But there's a lot of, like, there's a moment in issue 3 when Myra is trying to help the question, and she like damn near strips down to her lingerie to kind of like to throw these cops off. Yeah, you know, and I was like, that's a pretty gutsy move. It's a smart move to do as the character
in that situation.
To do that in a comic.
Yeah.
At this time, again, this is 7 years before Vertigo.
Yeah, they're really pushing things. Like, it's super on the edge. Like, yeah, as a kid, it really blew my mind reading this book. And again, we can't emphasize enough how different this was from the average comics that were on the stand from both DC and Marvel at this time in '86. I mean, it's extraordinary. And you look at it now, and you may not have the awareness of how different this is, but just please be aware that this was an incredibly bold book for a mainstream publisher to put out in so many ways here. And by the way, speaking of that, I found the panel that I was thinking of that was here in the issue where Vic's talking about his own childhood. And it's when he returns to the orphanage and he says, relax, breathing, heartbeat, become calm. Don't think about the medical reports. The ones that relate how a 6-month-old infant was left at a hospital, his tiny body covered with scalds and bruises. Don't remember the orphanage, the bullying of the other boys, the cruelty of the teachers, the consuming loneliness. Forget all of that. Let calmness happen. Let relaxation, because there can't be any mistakes. And so here again, it's like Denny O'Neil just reaching for Zen philosophy in terms of how to calm a character's mind in the midst of remembering this horrific personal trauma he suffered. And, you know, this is so just like unique in talking about stuff because it's not like Batman. It's not like he saw his parents get killed in front of him. It's not like Superman. It's not like he's the sole survivor of an alien planet. It's nothing like that's kind of sexy and cool in a certain way, like, ooh, what a dark, you know, interesting origin story. You know, you're a survivor whose family was killed, but you were this or you were that. It's not something that you can say that you can wrap up in a neat little cool sounding pitch like that. It's more like, oh no, you're a deeply traumatized infant who is abandoned at a hospital because your family was a bunch of horrible, fucked up people who scalded you as a 6-month-old with burning water and apparently beat you enough that you were bruised as a 6-month-old and then abandoned you at a hospital, or somebody did. Like, that is hardly the average superhero origin story. It's very dark, and it goes by in a single couple panels there.
I mean, it's super dark. I mean, like, and the thing too, it's like, you know, like later on, like you meet the guy named Musto, you know, and he's beating up his son who he doesn't like, and he says something like, he called that a boy. What I call it is an abortion that lived, and I'm kind of like, you look at this, you look at the scene about how the child is being beat and abused, and I'm kind of like, there aren't even movies at this time that are doing this.
No.
You know?
Not that I can think of.
Like, the movies are afraid to get this dark. This kind of like domestic abuse is untouched in any popular media. Obviously, you know, like I'm not gonna include like novels in that statement because novels have been doing that forever. But
right,
in terms of like, you know, this pop stuff,
popular media though, like, and sure, there might have been like indie cinema on the fringes that maybe touched on this stuff, but not that much though. Not that much, really.
No, because like the kind of indie cinema that would touch on this stuff was coming out in the 90s. Wasn't I mean, there wasn't really that much of an indie. The indie cinema scene in the 80s at this time was like those Canon films with Cowan and Globus. You know, this is pre Miramax.
What year was, you would know this maybe? What year was Sex, Lies, and Videotape?
It's 89.
89. Okay, shit. So you're right, Chris. Fuck, this is before that. Yeah, this is 86. Yeah, it's really interesting because when we talk about this book and Swamp Thing from Alan Moore, and like what was so subversive and insane to me was that books like this, you know, I think the question, I'm not sure because it was like new format and it's like whatever Baxter format or Mondo paper, whatever DC was calling this paper. But I know Swamp Thing for sure. Some of these books were available at newsstands, you know, just ordinary newsstands for like, you know, liquor stores and supermarkets and gas stations where kids could pick up these comics. And with the type of content that was being explored and the ideas being explored, that to me is what's so subversive and amazing about comic books in this period, is that you would have these kinds of ideas and thoughts and issues being discussed in a place where a kid who had $1 in their pocket could just go pick up this story. And I was that kid on many occasions, and it just fucking blew my mind to be reading about some of this stuff. And your parents think you're picking up a fucking superhero comic and it's all la-di-da, but meanwhile you're reading about domestic abuse and like all these horrific things that are important for a kid to be aware of, but it's also a lot. And, you know, I could see some people probably not being comfortable with their kids reading this. My parents were totally cool with it, thankfully for me. But yeah, it is really fascinating. And you're right. These subjects are not ones that popular media was comfortable tackling in the 80s. And yet here they were front and center in a comic that is just frankly unrelenting. As you know, we read the first 8 issues, and if we went further, it's not like it lightens up. If anything, it gets darker. You know, like it keeps getting darker as they get more comfortable with the world.
Guys are probably getting in their stride. I mean, like, you know, because it's like this is the again I was saying earlier about like context of when something is released to the world has a lot to do with its impact and its artistic merit. You know, I mean, look, to a certain degree, some of the stuff that happens in this book and the vigilantism is stuff that would have shown up in like one of these Charles Bronson movies or like Straw Dogs or something like that. But those movies from the 70s received such there was such a public outcry, you know, Walking Tall,
right.
I can't remember the name of those Bronson movies.
Like Death Wish.
Yeah, Death Wish, Death Rage was the other one. You know, like I Spit on Your Grave. You know, all this kind of stuff. And when Reagan came in 1980, there was this big pullback on like the type of movies that could gonna get made.
Well, what about Dirty Harry? Where would you put Dirty Harry and all that?
Okay, so Dirty Harry was, again, I think the first one was like 72 or 74. And by the time you get into 86, I think there is no more Dirty Harry movies. I think the last one, like, I mean, the most difficult, I think the one that had Welcome to the Jungle in it as part of the music, that wasn't Deadpool, or it might have been Deadpool.
Not the Deadpool people are thinking of.
No. The Dirty Harry movies were Dirty Harry, Magnum Force, Sudden Impact, Deadpool, and I think there was one more. I can't remember offhand, but I know it's at least those 4. There might have been a 5th one, the one with the Welcome to the Jungle, that Guns N' Roses song was used in the advertising. I don't know if it was just used in the movie. But those type of brutal films like that, and those kind of like a cop on the rampage, not the way that, you know, not like Jack Bauer and shit like that, like a real rampaging cop.
Yeah.
We're kind of petering out of this, but I only think that the Clint Eastwood movies were working. He was doing those Dirty Harry films in the 80s because he needed to do those to like satisfy some Warner Brothers, because he wanted to do stuff like Bird and wanted to do stuff like Unforgiven and stuff like that. And they were like, well, we'll do that. Well, if you want to do that art shit, Clint, you better do some Dirty Harry for us.
Right. Yeah.
That's why he did it. But, you know, that's like a big and that's like what, installment 5 and 6 in it, or 4 and 5 in a big ass franchise. But these guys are pulling this whole cloth out of nowhere, and this is like right around the time when like Nancy Reagan was tripping about shit, and just like it's the level of like violence that was available to children and teens. Was being monitored a lot in you know, but not in comics.
No, not in comics. And actually, and another thing, like hearing you talk about those movies, Chris, another thing that kind of occurs to me that I'd be curious about your thoughts on is that all those movies really, they're coming from a very conservative perspective or a conservative point of view, politically speaking, right? Like the Death Wish films and, you know, Charles Bronson and Dirty Harry. I mean, those movies, to me, like they're all coming from this sort of like conservative paranoia about crime and cleaning up the streets and whatnot. And those are all kind of like uncomfortable movies to watch now because, you know, I mean, I haven't seen those movies forever or ever, but my understanding or my impression of them is that they seem like they're coming from a very conservative place. Whereas it's interesting to me that the question is being written by Denny O'Neil, and it's kind of like Denny O'Neil himself grappling with, how do I write a vigilante crime fighter character in a city that has been ravaged by corrupt politics and all this crime is a natural outgrowth of these political policies and the greed and corruption of all these leaders. And so I know Denny O'Neil's personal politics have to be very anti sort of Death Wish or Dirty Harry or that kind of thinking. And so I feel like there's an interesting tension in the question, which is O'Neil sort of having almost like the prompt of like, hey, you want to write a vigilante story? And for him, it's like, yeah, but it's going to be my kind of vigilante story, which is not going to be the kind that Charles Bronson or Clint Eastwood might like. Mine's going to be a really philosophical story where we're going to point the finger at the corrupt politicians even more so than these criminals in the streets. And my character is going to be really grappling with what he's doing. And it's going to be a lot more nuanced than just like all this bullshit that you saw in these Chuck Bronson or all these other movies where it became so reductive and simplistic in terms of like who the problem was. Like the problem is, these criminals, blah, blah, blah. But in Denny O'Neil's worldview, that's not the problem. I think Denny O'Neil's worldview is like, no, that's the crime we're seeing as a result of these other larger systems. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about more so.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because two things. One, outside of Dirty Harry, these other things, like again, like Straw Dogs and some of those horror films from the 70s, and obviously Charles Bronson things, those are those vigilantes again, and like Batman, they are on a revenge kick.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've had a parent killed, they've had a daughter raped. There's that one really good George C. Scott movie where his daughter's been kidnapped and like she's been put in the white slavery ward and the porn ward, and he's going after her and trying to burn. There's a lot of that kind of revenge. Like what happens if you do this? And Vic Sage, he's like, I'm a product of that broken time period too.
Right.
And not time period, but the broken society.
Yes.
And it's up to, and he's mad that people aren't, that the city, like the structures of the city, like you're saying, the systems of the city have gotten so decayed and no one's done anything about it.
Yeah.
Like he personally hasn't been harmed outside of the orphan upbringing, but he's risen above that. He's not even taking it as like I'm trying to fuck people over. It's like he knows that people aren't going to survive the right way if you don't look at the systems.
Yeah.
And and you're right. It's like, how does he want to tackle being a vigilante? Because we mentioned the book Vigilante, which we want to talk about. I came out around this time. I mean, that guy. I remember his name is Adrian. I can't remember his name.
Adrian Chase.
Chase. He had a problem. It's a revenge thing too.
Yeah.
And the Punisher is a revenge thing.
Yeah, totally. And I think Vigilante and Punisher are much more in the mold maybe of like the Death Wish films.
Yes.
Or right? Because those are those kind of revenge stories. Yeah. And which is, I think, a little bit more of like a simplistic sort of approach. Like, okay, you killed one of mine, so I need revenge. I'm going to go kill you or get revenge for what happened to my people. But like the question, I think, like you say, it's an interesting origin story for a comic book character, for a crime fighter, because it's a very diffuse sort of an origin story, if that's the right word, because it's not like it's directed at one incident. You know what I mean? Like where most comic book origin stories, there's a particular flashpoint, there's a particular incident or a trauma that's launched this character onto this path. Where with Vic Sage, like you say, it's more like he's a product of this broken, corrupt society that Hub City is particularly emblematic of. And he's had enough of the corruption and the crime, and he decides he's going to fight back for those who are not able to. But he sees himself as one of many, many victims instead of like one specific person who has been victimized and needs revenge for themselves. Right. And I think that's interesting, I think almost politically speaking, because Vic Sage is not about himself and what happened to him. He's more about the greater good, right? He's about the society, and this is wrong, and so I will step up, because if not me, then who? I am able to. I know I can do this, so I'm going to.
Yeah, well, because the whole part later on, I think issue 5, when the city's burning down for the riots, and Todd says to him, "Hey man, you've been up for 36 hours straight, not taking a break," and he's kind of like, "I have to because there's no one else who will help me." Yeah. It's interesting. I just want to, just as we get back to issue 4, 2 things I want to say. When he confronts the street criminals, the people who would get shot in a Charles Bronson movie, like who would attack you. You know, he always gives them the chance to say, hey, let's not go this far. You know, like he always gives them a chance to like, don't, you know what, like walk away so you can stay alive. But if you're not going, I'm giving you the opportunity. You know, I mean, it isn't always it, but he does it a few times where he's like not trying to just go off half cocked and just whoop everyone's ass who looks like a criminal. He's kind of like, you can stop right now and we can end this. And then they don't, you know, they fuck it up. But I want to bring up this part in the middle of issue 3 when he goes to see this old black man who runs the bus stop.
Oh, right.
You know, like the kids are going to get blown up at the bus station. I believe this is the first black character in the comic, and we're issue, I guess, 3. It might have been one issue 2, but I don't remember.
I think there might have been like one of the
issue 1, not issue 2, because that was a training issue. But what Dennis does in this that I appreciate is he actually like every black character has the kind of like obviously Dennis is black, but he's drawing them to give them a personality and to give them a like a very kind of like the various shades of what I meant to say is the features are different, you know,
right?
Like if you look at the way a lot of white guys draw black men in the 70s and 80s, they all kind of have a very specific kind of look of someone who hasn't really studied the way black people look with their features and stuff like that. And it's interesting that Dennis is a black guy, and this is something that, like, you know, that Heward and I say a lot on the Rant Room podcast is, you know, particularly being black writers and black filmmakers, we're very aware of the white world around us. We're very aware of the kind of like the nuances and how white people look, and as well as how the nuances of how black people look. One of the things really cool about this book is that every character has a very kind of distinct look to them, you know. And this old black guy, like he looks like an old black guy. Like his language is kind of broken up, and it's very, very. It's not stereotypical, you know, like jive street slang, but it's like he speaks in a way of an uneducated black man who's been at this job as like a dispatcher for these school buses for like 50 years and can't get out of this. And you can kind of read like the world weariness in his face of like this rundown, like, you know, like job that's got no future, and he stayed at it for, you know, like past the better years of his lives and now into his like his golden years. And all throughout the book, whenever you meet black people, they have that kind of like, you know, specificity in the drawing. And I just don't. I mean, because you could look at Falcon, you could look at Power Man, you could look at the Black Lightning, you could look at Black Panther. If you pulled out those characters from white, drawn by white people, and just put their faces next to each other and find a way to strip out their costuming, they would all kind of look the same.
It's the same type of look, or
it's the same type. It's the same kind of like archetypical, you know, like drawing. Because later on in this, there's this one guy, I don't remember his name. Here his name is Jake. It's that one guy who's working for the Reverend. The muscle with the orange hair, and then like he looks like one thing in that guy named Musto and his son. He's driving with someone else who looks like a fucking, you know, there's enough difference. Like this is a great thing about Dennis's work and even Myra, like the way she's drawn, like she doesn't look like, you know, like a typical kind of like there's like a look. It's like a, I don't know, like it's an archetype that you see a lot. And it's
totally.
Like, you know,
and she doesn't look like a typical comic book, you know, like sexy woman. Yeah, not at all. Not at all. She's got a very unique look to her, and she's attractive, but not in a cliche or commonplace way. And just, you know, she looks like a, you know, an attractive brunette, but she has very distinct features that don't look typical.
Right. And what also great is that Dennis is not drawing her with like, you know, like the magnified double D breasts.
Oh God, no, none of that. No. There's like zero. There's really almost zero lasciviousness in the way that Dennis is portraying the women here, except if there's like a specific scene that calls for that for some moment where the sexuality is a part of what's happening. But otherwise, I think that's something where Dennis is really ahead of his time here as an artist in comics. Is he is not drawing these cliche looking women who are, the type that we've seen for decades in comics that really a lot of artists still were drawing. Most artists were still drawing at this time. So
I think that most artists still draw now. I think a lot of artists that they want to draw. I think this is like an interesting thing about this book is that people, I think this is something about movies too for a long time. And I still think it holds true to movies, and at some degree I think it needs to, is that you want to draw beautiful people, it's like it's like that, or not necessarily beautiful people, but people who are at their pinnacle, right? And like whatever it is, their looks, their muscles, their sexuality, their brawn, whatever it is, that's kind of what you want to do. And I feel like the fact that he doesn't do that with anybody in this. Like even these gangsters don't look like really menacing gangsters.
No, everyone looks kind of fucked up in Hub City, which feels very appropriate given the context of the story. Even Vic Sage is constantly
also because it's in the Midwest, and I feel like in the Midwest there's that sense of like people are like they're a little more dumpier than they are in the East Coast and West Coast. It's just being from there, I kind of have.
I was going to say you can say that because you grew up there.
like I'm kind of attuned to like, this looks like this. Looks like this. I mean, what you call it? The rest of issue 3 is he's got to save that bus, the kids from being blown up on the bus, which is really cool. There's like. Where are we at? Page 22, 23, and 24 are, it's when Musto's kid is going to throw some dynamite into the bus. And there's a little bit of dialogue on the top of page 22, but the rest of it, and maybe one line on page 23, it's all silent. Like it reads like that silent G.I. Joe issue, where it's just Cowan's art telling you the action and showing it to you in like this like boom. It's very cinematic.
It's very cinematic, and it's also just brilliant comic book storytelling. And it, like we keep saying, is so unusual for that time. But yeah, looking at this page 20 here and page 20, 22, and 23, there are 24. It's a lot of largely silent pages, and it's just done beautifully, like really elegant storytelling, totally clear what's happening. And yeah, it's also cinematic, but I think it's specifically just great comic book storytelling too. It really works.
Yeah, this is a great thing on page 24 when he's throwing the dynamite. It's those 3 panels back to back to back that kind of show his arm cocking back to throw the dynamite.
Oh yeah,
I think that's really cool, just like page layout and page design. And at the end of it, he goes to an orphanage where he's going to meet Myra's daughter. Because Myra, although she had a daughter that she never told him about, this is prior to their engagement before he got beat up by Shiva, and that she's kind of used as a pawn by the Reverend as it's keeping her away from Myra, who's kind of living like a kept woman with the mayor.
Yeah, and this was like a little confusing to me too, that Myra had kind of just abandoned her daughter at the orphanage. Like there's not a lot said about it.
To me, I didn't really like she abandoned her daughter. To me, the way I read it is that the Reverend like forced her to put the daughter, because you find out later on the Reverend forced her into this marriage. And to me, at first, I was reading it, I was like, "Oh, she lied to him and didn't tell him that she was married to this." Like like when they were fucking, like that was wow, this woman's scandalous as shit, But then it comes out as like, oh no, she's in like some loveless marriage that she's a kept woman, and the guy didn't want the kid around, and it goes to this level of like the human misery that Denny O'Neil kind of keeps conjuring up within Hub City is pretty it's shocking now. It's like, what the fuck, dude? Like, damn.
Yeah, it's very dark. It's very, very dark. And you're right. All the characters are suffering in so much misery. Even the character who is going to plant this bomb and then eventually throw this dynamite onto this bus full of school children, even that character who's like the despicable terrorist character that you wouldn't think twice about in the average comic, even he is suffering under the incredible sort of iron rule and abusive rule of his father, who's like the head terrorist, who's treating his kid horribly and like you mentioned earlier, saying he's like an abortion who lived and all this shit and beating him up. And so O'Neil is even exploring the real suffering of this quote unquote terrorist who's about to kill a bunch of innocent school children. And he's doing it to kind of prove his worth to his father, who's this abusive monster. So it's like no one in this story is having an easy go of it in Hub City.
No, I mean, the thing I love about the I don't know of any, again, so I love is not, this is something that you would do in a Vertigo book, obviously, 7 years later, but to have the kid who can't get his father's love and is hated by his dad is in a superhero comic in the mid 80s is such, and that's a villain is such a, like we said earlier, it's like not the Ayn Rand black and white. It's like the grays in this, are so. It's like that. What's that guy Ansel Adams with his zone system? Like there's 7 shades of gray you gotta look for.
Oh shit, the photographer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this. It's like you're like, what is going on with this?
Totally.
I mean, he's just a side character. He's not. But he's getting his ass beat by his dad. Like his dad is like punching him in the face. He's putting a cigarette on his face. He's just doing all this wild ass shit. I mean, what's even worse is the one issue. I think it's the number 8, the Mikado one. We're jumping ahead, but it's like there's that one fat guy who's like not feeding his kid. And
oh god!
And I was like, what the hell?
It's so
are
brutal.
you about?
Yeah. No, it's fucking wild, man. Like this story explores the depravity and just the darkness in like the hearts of people in a really intense way. And like Hub City is almost like it's Dante's Inferno. It's just this place where everyone is in some version of hell and everyone's going through their own particular crucible, whatever it is. But Vic Sage and the Question is here kind of as our guide through all of it. But it is really rough going all around. And so I think what is especially noteworthy, though, as we're talking about with some of these characters, is that O'Neil and Cowan, they make you feel for the villains. They make you feel for some of these characters that seem so despicable and are, but yet they don't stop at that. And they don't act like, oh, these are just evil people. They show you much of the time what has caused sort of the descent into what we would call evil. And they show the reasons for it in a way that sometimes is quite sympathetic, like this kid being abused horribly by his father. And when you see that, you're like, oh, poor kid, I feel so bad for this kid. But then like 10 pages later, the kid's like, okay, Dad, I'm going to go blow up a school bus full of innocent children. To win your love.
Because that's so much of a psychopath I am.
Right. And then you're like, no, kid, no, don't do that. Like I felt for you a second ago, but no, that's not the way to deal with it. No. So it's wild.
It's interesting. So let's jump into issue 4 real quick.
Yeah.
So issue 4 picks up. We're back at the orphanage where we left Vic Sage when he was helping Myra's kid build a snowman. But there's this interesting little scene with that guy Jake, and he's with this black guy who's got dreadlocks, and he kind of reminded me of Gary Oldman in True Romance.
Oh yeah, that character. Oh my god, that's a wild character.
It's like that's his kind of. He kind of has that. He's not high like that, but he does have that kind of like flavor to him. And again, a black guy who's got an entirely different kind of look and feel and like just execution and expression that I thought was really, really cool.
I'm glad you're pointing that out. I'm glad you keep pointing that out because I think that is so rare and unusual. You're right for comics at that time, and I mean,
because like. Remember in Daredevil, the Frank Miller's Daredevil, there was that character named Turk, that black guy who was showing up. Like he was like a street hood who was always he was like a ne'er-do-well street hood. Like I like that character as what he was, but he was always drawn like a certain kind of black guy that's like he exudes thug. And even though the guy he wasn't a thug, he was a criminal. but he wasn't like a thug. Like he was trying to be smart, but always got outsmarted by a daredevil. But he never looked like he had any intelligence. And this guy looks like he's got a beret on, he's got those John Lennon circular glasses, and he's got dreadlocks. And it's kind of crazy.
It's also like specific though, right? Like, we always talk about with writing, like good writing is like, your characters have to all have specificity and you got to make choices. You can't just have generic thug 1, 2, 3. And in this case, you're right. Like these are very specific choices that are being made. This thug has a very different fashion sense than this other thug. And you would imagine very different interests and tastes. And you can see all that communicated the way he's dressed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything. It's interesting. There's a little panel on page 3 when he's like finishing up the snowman, and he's using that like zip tone or duotone to kind of give you the shadow of the tree because
yeah, I see that. That's really subtle.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's subtle, pretty.
Because there's not a lot of that in this book. It's occasional, but it really worked there because they're in the snow and in the white. And I don't know how else he would get that kind of feeling.
Yeah, you're right. That is actually really pretty. And honestly, I feel like that points out we've gone a little bit light on discussing the art in this episode, but there are just like increasingly so many beautiful moments in the art. And I want to call out especially that I think Dennis Cowan does some incredibly striking splash pages. Like even in this issue, number 4, the opening splash page of the Reverend just looking so decrepit and just so crazed, and it's a giant close-up on the Reverend. He's literally drooling. Like he's clearly out of his head. He's also got these black beady eyes that like are just, his eyes are ensconced in darkness, like there's no light in his eyes whatsoever. And that feels very intentional because this his soul is clearly lost and he's a guy who's very, very far gone. But these are incredibly striking splash pages in issue after issue. I mentioned issue number 2 had that incredible full page image of Vic Sage.
Black and white one.
Yeah, the black and white one.
I mean,
yeah, a lot of these are amazing.
What's cool about this is that in this issue that's called The Sacrifice, you find out that the Reverend is like, he's hearing voices, and it's interesting now that you see this twisted, corrupted face is like, because he believes he's almost like the son of Sam.
Yeah.
He thinks he's hearing some voices telling him to do evil shit, and he's gonna do evil shit in this book. He's gonna try to kill like Myra's child, like he's gonna
literally
sacrifice.
Yes.
He's like gonna sacrifice her, like was it like Jonah or Abraham and the whale or some?
Yeah. And he's got the child up on a fucking altar, and he's got a knife, and he's literally about to do some satanic sacrifice type of shit with Myra's child. And again, man, like I just gotta say, like this is not the kind of material you saw in most comic books, and you would see it later, but. I mean, fuck it. 1986. This was very jarring content to find in any kind of comic book.
It's still a little jarring now.
Yeah.
It's like,
yes.
But something I want to point out that I thought was actually like a cool little thing. I've never seen anybody do this. Vic Sage, he drives like a Volkswagen Beetle. So if this is probably like in the 86, this is before the new Beetles came out. So this is the body of one of those from the 70s, right? Yeah. But he's got it like tricked out where it's like got like a Porsche engine and like racing shocks and like Ferrari transmission. Like he's a great kind of like camouflage for what he's trying to do, which I think is kind of funny, but it's also kind of cool because like, I didn't know you would do this shit like that.
It is a cool detail. It's a really cool detail, and I think O'Neil was particularly happy about that because he mentions it in 2 separate issues. Because I think he was very pleased with that.
He was like, "Oh, I love the way you do this." The story keeps going on. He's trying to figure. So Myra's gets kidnapped. So Myra's daughter gets kidnapped by these cops, and Vic can't do anything about it. And then the rest of the book, he's just trying to find out like what's going on with the girl. The mayor is showing how much of a drunk he is, showing how much of a weak puppet he is, a puppet of Reverend Hatch. They just be interesting in this. Like Vic Sage, because his car gets damaged, he steals a cop car. Like, dude, you tripping? Stealing a cop car?
You don't see that. You don't see Batman do that. Yeah, you don't see that every day. And another thing you don't see every day is Vic Sage, right after his car breaks down, he also goes home, and what is he doing while he's talking with Tot? at his house, because apparently like him and Tot are pretty much living together, which is weird, but that's okay. They're just kind of, I guess, I don't know if they're roommates now, or did you get the sense of like, has Vic moved into Tot's house? Is that what's happening?
I kind of feel like he moved in after he got hurt and got rehabilitated.
And I think that's it.
And I think that he never went back to, he went to his one place in issue 2 to get the Crushing uniform. But I get the feeling that he doesn't hang out there because he hasn't confirmed with the world that Vic Sage.
Oh yes, you know what? That's right. Yeah, right. You're right about that. I forgot about that because he says at the end of these issues, at the end of these 8 issues, that he's about to like tell the rest of the world that Vic Sage is back, and he's got to make up a story for what happened to him. That's right. So yeah, so he's staying with Tot, but the thing I wanted to point out is that he's doing yoga, and he's doing like an increasingly difficult series of yoga positions while him and Tot are talking for 2 pages, and that also just the casual way that that's done was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, because he's like doing like on his back and like doing some lotus pose, but on his back, or actually bouncing on his shoulders. But it tells you again, it's like one of these cool things where it's like he's continuing with the education and the honing of his body and mind that Richard Dragon taught him.
Exactly.
There's never a moment where he's not gonna reach that plane of like I gotta be a better me. I gotta be a better me to be better for the people.
That's totally true. And then even when Tot offers him coffee here, and Vic says he's doing yoga, and he says, "No, I can't afford what coffee does to my nervous system. Not today." It's like, I mean, it's really it's across the board. Vic is honing his body into perfection, and it's another place where I feel like you see that Cowan and O'Neil are, aware of yoga and martial arts, and these are not bullshit yoga poses. These look like real yoga poses that Vic is doing, and I think Dennis Cowan is probably one of the few artists in comics that probably even knew what real yoga poses looked like. Right.
The story keeps rolling. Again, the part where he steals the cop car, there's these 2 cops, a black guy and a white guy. And again, that black cop looks entirely different than anybody. Like, he looks a little overweight. He's got jowls. He's got a mustache. He doesn't look like a generic black guy. Again, I think that's kind of fascinating. And then we go into the story where Vic Sage, he knows where Myra is and where the kid is, and they're all holed up at the governor's mansion, and he's going there to do the final showdown. And the final showdown is going to be against the Reverend. This is when the Reverend is like talking about he's waiting to hear some angel to save him or to save the baby. His eyes kind of fucked up. I think his eyes fucked up because in the previous episode, remember he jumped out the window and he was like on fire?
Oh yeah, that's right. He fucked himself up.
Fucked up that way.
It's weird too, because if you look at him though, Dennis is drawing the Reverend in an increasingly bizarre way where he's looking really like he's in the grip of madness. Like, I'm thinking particularly on page 22 where he's about to sacrifice this child who is Myra's kid. Like, the Reverend is being drawn to look almost like a demon on these pages, those first couple panels there.
Well, I mean, like, you know what? On page 23, the top of page 23, where he's getting ready to stab the child and gets stopped by the Vic Sage, he almost reminds me of like Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah, I can see that.
You got the little white hair in the back. I mean, that's like a Ra's al Ghul. Not that Ra's al Ghul would be killing people like that, but it just feels like it's that kind. It's like an homage to that, And what I love in this scene is that Vic is not gonna. He's not going to kill the Reverend. He's like, you know what? As evil as you are, I'm actually going to like try to take you in or let you suffer some other way.
Or I'm not going to sink to your level. I'm not going to become something I despise like you, something vicious and corrupt. I will let you live. And then Myra breaks free.
Like, oh no, not me. She stabs
I won't. Yeah.
I mean, she stabs him so hard the blade comes through his chest. Do you know how hard it is to stab someone like that?
It takes a lot of rage.
Because it's like, I mean, I've tried to stab through like some meat, And it's hard to stab people like me. I'm going to cook. And she's like gone through this guy's whole chest cavity and that's like a really angry woman.
Well, then, you can understand why she was so angry, given the circumstance.
Yeah. Well, here's what's great, right? Is that this last page, this is again why this book, even though it's called The Question, it always it leaves you thinking about a question about the morality of this. So the Reverend Hatch is dead. Sage has the question of saving the child and saving Myra. And they go outside and meet the police and the fire people because the house is on fire, mansion's on fire. And then she says to him, "Wait, don't you have anything to say, like, to help console me for killing this guy or anything?" And he's like, "No, I don't."
He says,
"Better you than me."
That's it.
You know what? I'd rather you deal with the guilt than me. I mean,
right.
And that's such a pretty. And then again, it's not a full splash face, but it's a good close up on his face.
Yeah,
and it's just the question's face. We don't see any expression, so we just get this kind of like extra blank sense of like, what's he saying? What's he thinking? What's the question that he's put into her mind by not accepting like any blame for any of this? It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's a very just a very kind of engaging and unique way to end that story. Just
by the way,
leaves you with a lot of thoughts.
In the letter column, this month's recommended reading, presented by Denny O'Neil, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, written by Dan Millman and published by H.J. Kramer. As always, let us know your thoughts.
I love that.
If there's anybody who showed up in here. Oh my God. Who is one of the writers? Who wrote in a letter for this? You would not believe. John Ostrander.
Oh, are you kidding? Oh, that's fucking great. That's cool. Did Ostrander have anything interesting to say? Mr. John Ostrander, writer of the Suicide Squad comic.
This is Dear Denny, Dennis, Rick et al. Okay. I'll buy the second issue. I don't have to, Mike's a good buddy. Even worked on a secret project together, and I couldn't probably wheedle an issue out of him. I could have probably done that. And Denny's my editor here over on Firestorm, and I probably could get him to give me a copy, or I could call Bob Greenberg, my editor on Suicide Squad, who's also a continuity cop, and make a pitch to him. But I really needed to get a copy and get him to send me one. But I'm not going to cash. But he goes, but I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to go pay cash money for it. And do you know why? Because the first issue was that good. So where is it? That's it.
That's sweet.
It says via MCI mail. I don't know what that is.
Wow, that's weird.
MCI mail. I wonder if that's some sort of like internal,
intercompany mail kind of thing.
What if that's like an early version of email?
Yeah, I have no idea. That is bizarre, but very sweet of John Ostrander to write in supporting his buddies there.
I know. Awesome.
That's really cool.
So that was issue 4. Which is pretty awesome. I mean, and that ended the first story arc. That was the end of the Reverend, who had been played.
Yes, and in case we hadn't made it clear before, the Reverend basically was like you said, he was the figurehead in a way, but it was like the Reverend kind of was the one who had the actual control. In a way, it's like, I guess in a way, the mayor was the figurehead because he seemed to have control, but the Reverend was the one really pulling the strings behind the scenes. But the Reverend Hatch was the one running Hub City, essentially, while Mayor Wesley Furman was just this drunken kind of a mess. And he was out there giving drunken speeches, but it was the Reverend really running shit in a corrupt way behind the scenes. And also, I gotta say, Denny O'Neil did a pretty good job with some of the names here, because I think Wesley Furman as a name for a mayor who's a drunk, kind of ineffective mess, it's a good name because, well, Furman is not quite vermin. It rhymes. It's close enough. that I think it's one of those names that's like intentionally chosen by a writer to evoke a certain feeling. And I think Wesley Furman is a good name for a mayor who basically has no value to the city.
But Furman also sounds like it's like fermented.
Oh, that's a good point. So
it feels like it's like, it's rotten.
Fermented with alcohol. Yeah.
And he's drinking all the time.
There's
like
really
there's a great scene where he fucks up and Myra like pours alcohol in the back of his head. I love that little shit.
Yeah, I think that Myra pours it right on him. Yes, I think that O'Neil, like, I get the sense that he is choosing so many of these names purposefully and intentionally, and I wonder what the story is behind all of them. But even Reverend Hatch, I think it's like, is it Reverend Jeremiah Hatch or something like that?
Hatch,
even Hatch, even that kind of evokes to me the idea of like a trapdoor maybe falling into hell. It's like these are like very poetically chosen names, but they're not so heavy-handed. They're not so over the top that you're like, oh, damn, dude, that's pretty ham-fisted. They're just kind of like walking the line where I feel like there's some thinking behind them, but they're not banging you over the head too much. So I'd be curious. I would have been curious to ask Denny O'Neil what some of his thought process was on some of these names, but these are things that I think often other writers wonder about more than most people.
No, you're right. So issue 3, like with the mayor drunk and the reverend dead, the city kind of goes into chaos.
Issue 4.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. I'm sorry. So now issue 5, we're in the aftermath. We're in the wake of the chaos beginning.
Yes.
Again, here we go on page 3. We have 3 thugs with knives trying to stick up an old lady. There's 2 black guys and it looks like a Latin guy, maybe Asian. But those 2 black guys look different. They all look different than the previous black guys we've seen. One guy's got a Kango hat on with some square glasses.
Yeah, you're right.
Much of the like we were saying, like they're costume designers. These guys are like drawing how people were looking of the time, like very much of the time, which is kind of great. And Vic is out trying to just stop street crime wherever he can because he sees how the police are so inept and just can't help on any level. And he just wants to, he goes, this is a great line. He goes, the city is going to hell around us and it's my fault. And he goes, like, I feel responsible. And it's this level of like personal sense of responsibility that he's going to take on.
Yeah, it's crazy that he feels that. Yeah.
Which is not the way a lot of other superheroes take on because, again, he's not been wronged by anything. There's no one's really personally wronged him,
except when he was a kid, but it was like, again, it was that diffuse kind of trauma from multiple sources. Yeah.
Yeah, of being in the system, like being a child of the system, I mean, the city kind of keeps, because the chaos and the rioting begins to unravel. He's still trying to find out what's going on. And no one's really doing anything to help anything. We meet that cop named Isidore O'Toole, who's pretty much just a corrupt dude.
Yes.
We meet that guy, Mr. Josephson. What the hell's his name? Is it Bernie Josephson?
Bernie Josephson. Yeah.
I mean, it's basically this businessman who's stuck at his office with his secretary, and they're afraid to leave because of the rioting outside. And he rapes her.
Yep. Yeah. It's brutal. I mean, it's a brutal sequence. And it's brutal also because we get the dialogue in the aftermath of the rape. And that was like, that's a scene that you don't often see anywhere. Like, this is just like such a brutal scene where in the wake of what's happened, the woman says, "You're disgusting. You're a disgusting old man. You're old and disgusting and stupid looking." And the rapist, Bernie, says, "I know." And then he begs for forgiveness, and she basically says, "Fuck no, I'm not doing that. I won't do that." And then he gets up on the roof of the building and fucking commits suicide and jumps off the. I mean, this is Hub City. Like, this is the world that Cowan and O'Neil have brought us into. It's like, it is unrelenting. It's just horrible things happen. bad people do bad things, whatever, or, you know, people have bad things done to them and then they do bad things to other people. It is just like you see this never-ending daisy chain, this series of dominoes constantly falling, where the effects of everything just look like they're more, it's more and more horror and trauma being created in the city. And yeah, it's incredible to see this play out in the story, because again, there's no easy answers to a lot of this. And this was, I thought, a particularly well-written issue in that the storyline kind of weaves between multiple threads. And I don't feel like O'Neil got as much credit as he deserved a lot of times as a writer during this period, because I think Denny O'Neil had improved significantly as a writer by the time he got to the question compared to his old Green Arrow, Green Lantern stuff, which I think the Green Arrow, Green Lantern stuff had a bigger impact on comics in a way, and on culture, because it was dealing with all these heavy socially conscious issues at a time comics didn't do that in the 70s. But I think if you go back and you read those stories, they're a bit of a tough read, those stories, because they are a bit more ham-fisted and heavy-handed. But I think by the time that O'Neil got to the question, I think he was actually a far more skilled and subtle writer in a lot of ways. And I don't know that he always gets the credit he deserves, because I think this is a particularly really brilliantly written issue, and he's got so many disparate threads, from the old woman who almost got mugged at the beginning, who's waiting for the bus, to like the opening where we see the beginning of how Hub City was discovered and first founded, you know, with a guy being murdered. And then there's the Vic dealing with the riots with Tot driving through the city. And then we also flash to Mayor Wesley Furman giving a drunken speech, which we see a couple pages of. And then we go back to Vic and Tot in the car listening to that speech on the radio, then back into that scene of the riots that you described earlier that Dennis Cowan drew so beautifully. And then we, off the street of Vic and Tot driving by the riots, we switch perspectives as they talk to the corrupt cop, Izzy O'Toole. And now they're talking to Izzy. And now we're following with the corrupt cop for a while, and then that's what leads us to the dude Bernie, and the secretary, who ends up being raped, and her name is Miss Tolchuk, Francine. Francine is raped by Bernie Josephson. We get that whole horrific scene, and then we go back to the woman on the bench waiting for the bus, and then we see the guy about to commit suicide, and then we cut to Myra in her house, and she's grappling with the after effects of having killed Reverend Hatch the issue before. And then as she's looking out her window right nearby, the dude commits suicide, jumps, and then the dude committing suicide lands on the street in front of Izzy, the corrupt cop, as he witnesses people trying to rob the dude who's just committed suicide, and he snaps at this moment, and the corrupt cop has an epiphany and discovers, after 20 years of corruption, rediscovers that this is what being a cop is all about, and he's not going to let these scumbags rob this guy who's barely cold, and he goes to stop them, goes to actually be a cop for once, and then he fucks up, and they get the drop on him, and they're about to kill him, and then the question shows up, and now the question has one more fight scene, interaction with Izzy, and then a little talking to Tot, and then back to sort of what's happening in the city a little bit. And then we check in with all of our characters, like all 6 or 7 of them. And we come back to that old woman sitting on the bench, and she's frosting over with snow all over her face.
Yeah, and she sat there for like 6 hours.
She sat there for 6 hours, like, yeah, over the course of our whole issue, and she might be there forever. And anyway, I just wanted to play all that out like that to point out that, like, that's like over a half a dozen separate plot threads that are all interconnected, and we're elegantly weaving between all of them. What other fucking comic was doing this at that time?
But also the story about Isidore, the story about Josephson and Francine, and the story about Maud. These are all new characters who just show up in this one issue.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. They just
and the issues they're done by the time the issue's over. I think you made an interesting point that I never thought about this. I've never seen this. I've never what happens, the conversation after the rape.
Yeah.
Because this isn't one of those rapes that they show a lot on the TV and the movies where it's like somebody raped you, like in Thelma and Louise. She gets raped in the parking lot, and like that kind of random rape. That's like the guy got spurned, he got rejected and wanted to fuck her over. And then, but we see a lot of these these sexual harassment rapes at jobs and stuff like that. We see the beginnings of that. You know, like someone drops their pants, and you know, and even movies like Dirty Pretty Things, like, you know, like she's sucking that guy's dick and a few times, like Audrey Tattoo, and then next thing you know, you're cutting her, you know, spitting his semen out and the thing like that. But this little moment, like after he's fucked her, and the conversation they have, I don't think I've ever seen that. I don't think I've ever seen.
Exactly.
I wonder if it's a weird thing, because like to go this far to as a writer, like into the after effect of the climactic moment here is like, you really got to delve into somebody's head.
Yeah, he's really deep.
I think that most writers wouldn't, because they'd kind of be like, I showed you what I wanted to show you. I want to show how horrific this is. Now I'm out. And I don't want to deal with the consequences of me showing you that with the characters. You know, you might have this scene. Look, I mean, when this guy jumps off the roof, it's a great little line right when he's about to fall. When he's like, I mean, he's already falling.
Yeah.
I mean, but to hit the ground, it says he's changed his mind.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to die.
Yeah.
He thinks he could live. But nope, you already jumped, dude.
Yep.
It's like, it's really, I mean, this look on his face on page 14 when he's putting the glasses on before he leaves and he goes, "I'm sorry."
Yeah.
This is really, I mean.
Yeah. When the fuck do you see that? Like he says, forgive me.
Guy. Like, you don't hate this guy. This is, I don't know. I mean, you know what? Or if you
do hate him, you might hate him, but you understand him more, or you feel like you've gone inside his psyche a lot more than you typically would inside the psyche of someone who's just committed a horrific act like this. And I think O'Neil does this consistently throughout all these horrible characters. He takes you inside their psyche, whether they're rapists, whether they're murderers, whether they're whatever type of horrific character about to kill a bunch of children. He takes you into their psyche. And he forces you to almost empathize with their perspective, and it's uncomfortable. You know, and that is very unique.
Remember the guy starting the rape? He says something that really just hits home. He's like, "My wife is sick. She's been sick for 15 years. I haven't touched a woman in 15 years." Like, that's telling you something about this guy.
Yeah.
And what's really great is there's a little moment. There's one panel on like the end of this, like you said, the little recap, the little thing in the TV show where there's like the little 2-minute montage at the end of an episode. You know,
yeah,
we catch that one shot of Josephson's wife. She's wondering where her husband is and why isn't he called.
Oh my God, that's a great point, Chris. I forgot about that. That's yet another character where O'Neil is taking you in to empathize with that character. And it's funny because I remember thinking like, oh, that would suck for that woman because she doesn't know, A, her husband's dead, B, she doesn't know her husband's a rapist, C, she doesn't know all these things. And like, it's one panel. It's one fucking panel that O'Neil shows you. I'm so glad you pointed that out. But I remember feeling like a pang of emotion reading that panel, like, oh, that poor woman. She's been sick. Yeah. She's been sick 15 years. Her husband's a rapist, and now he's dead. Like, and he's committed suicide. Like, that's incredible, and that's just fucking amazing storytelling. To go to the trouble of showing that panel, and it's a really interesting decision, even like from Cowan, to not show the woman's face, and it's just we see her from behind, and she's holding the alarm clock and staring at it and wondering where her husband is. Like, these are all choices, and they're very, very interesting choices. But yeah, I'm really happy you mentioned that panel because it's yet another example of sort of how generous, in a way, Denny O'Neil is as a storyteller, and he's got so much empathy for every character. And in a way, I could imagine this making a lot of readers very uncomfortable because O'Neil has empathy for everyone, you know? And it's a really compelling and fascinating thing to do as a writer, but I think it's also an uncomfortable thing for a lot of readers to experience. Like, how can you show this character as a human being? I remember there was that movie that came out about Hitler that was made by a filmmaker like 10 years ago. I think
Downfall.
Downfall, right. So and that film took a lot of fire, like the filmmaker took a lot of fire for humanizing, quote unquote, Adolf Hitler. And that's like the most extreme example, obviously, of this kind of thing we could talk about. But I think there is this desire for a lot of people to think of like just a monster is a monster, and you don't want to think about what created them. But I think Denny O'Neil rejects that here as a storyteller. He rejects that idea.
Well, here's something interesting that he does too. It's something that Dennis Cowan does. I think is fascinating. Dennis Cowan and the rest of the inker and the colorist. If you look at page 11 and 12, this is the rape setup, right? 11 is the rape setup, and 12 is the rape. The pages are black.
Oh yeah. Right? Oh, you're right.
The pages are like the bleed on the gutter. Yeah, the gutter is all black on that, right? And then when the rape is over, it's back to white. It's white again. Next time the pages is black is when we go to Myra, when she is recalling the fact that she's struggling with her own guilt about killing that guy.
That's a great point, dude.
And it's like, again, it's like the gutters and bleed is all black. And the rest of the book doesn't have that. And I was like, this is again where it's like Cowan with his ability to like how he's composing the page, how he wants to like set your brain. And he wants to put you in the darkest space possible of their psyche by having the page black. He's like when he's raping her, he's overwhelmed by his own. Id is taking over, you know. And again, Myra, it was her id that took over when she killed that guy, and that's what's like getting her again. It's really, this is I was thinking what to say about you were saying that like Denny O'Neil didn't get enough credit. It's like I feel like after he did those Neil Adams. The hard charging heroes with Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Yeah, he was an editor for a while, right?
Yep, yeah, for a long time. He was the editor on all the Batman books forever in the 80s.
For a long time. So it's interesting. It's like, oh, I bet you he's again as a student, probably a lifelong student. Yeah, he's like, oh, storytelling has changed. Now that I'm reading people who are giving me scripts that are more done this way, that are more they're more modern. So now I'm reading all that, and me being a writer, I can go back around and figure out a way to improve my writing and to deliver a different type of content when I next get a chance to do a book, which is this, and it's fascinating.
That's a great point. Yeah, because this is all post editing hundreds of books.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, you know, like, I don't know if I told you this, but it's like, you know, there was a time period where I had hit kind of like a wall with my screenwriting. And I was like, I couldn't understand where I was failing. And I gave up writing screenplays from like maybe 2012 to around maybe 2014 or something like that.
Oh shit, I didn't even know this. That's crazy.
I gave up writing screenplays for about 2.5, 3 years. But I was writing prose. I was writing short stories the whole time. I must have written like maybe 7 or 8 short stories. Like it was, you know, in such a different form, different medium, and writing short stories is even so different than even writing a novel, because you're trying to like compress a story in a way. And it taught me a lot as a writer. You know, in a way that I feel like it was very. I mean, look, I tried to get a couple of them published, but not like early ones and things like that. I mean, and honestly, like, you know, that comic I want to do, Eclipse of the Nine Suns, that started out as a short story.
Oh shit, I didn't know that. Oh, crazy.
And it was something that I couldn't. I wrote it one time from like third person, and then someone read it and liked it, but it was like, well, how come you never write it as first person? Because your main character is so compelling. And I went back and rewrote the whole thing as like first person, which taught me like I could do different things with how to like get into the psyche and be more in with the character in a way that you don't do. Like sometimes when you write third person, sometimes you're standoffish and a bit judgmental because you're just talking about someone. Right. If you're going to write a first person, then it's like, I got to write this like as if I'm experiencing it myself, and I'm conveying that to you and really get inside of a character, and just taught me something different. And then when I got rid of that version of the first person, I was like, I like this a lot, but I think it would work better if I did it as a comic book, and then I could tell it in first person as a comic, and I could use. It's just something that I learned about, like, you know, I stayed around the writing craft, not doing the thing I've been out here to do for a long time, and then when I went back to writing. And this was about the time that I met you. Like right after
I was about to ask you, because I feel like we've been friends now for like about 7-8 years or something like that. So that would have been right around the time where you were starting to pick up screenwriting again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Oh shit, man, that's so wild. I had no idea.
Well, because I mean, I was thinking about writing comics and that when we first met, and I was like talking to you so much about comics, because I was like that was in my head more than anything, you know. It's just of like how you could tell a comic story, because comic stories are fascinating because a lot like a screenplay, and you know, and like a short story, it's like you have like a finite amount of real estate. Like I remember John Rogers, the great screenwriter, did like, you know, he created Leverage and stuff like that. And I mean, he was always saying like comics are really hard because of those 22 pages, and then you have like a panel. There's a panel quantity you can't exceed per page, and we've talked about this before, how like Warren Ellis was talking about there's a certain number of like words you can put in a panel to go on a page, and it's like there's all these kind of limitations that the medium just can't withstand. Like I mean, you can tell when someone fucks all those things up. Oh, totally. Too many panels, too many words on a page. It's just like it's too much for you to kind of digest. And it's just so like to learn these other kind of like these other forms of writing. I don't know. Just I mean, I know that Denny learned a lot to help his own writing by doing editing, by staying around it, but not actually doing it. No. And then and these last 6 years, this Batman time, like this is when like Dark Knight's coming out. This is when, you know, like the book, like comics were hitting this stride.
I mean, Dark Knight and Watchmen. Dark Knight and Watchmen were both hitting right around this time of the Question, and that's the kind of energy that's in the air as O'Neil, like you say, is returning to writing after his time just kind of stewarding other writers for a decade or whatever. So I think that's amazing.
Because question issue 5, we're looking at, and looking in that little thing in the beginning of the checklist, is Watchmen issue 10. Out this same week. You know,
it's all happening, and Watchmen and, you know, Dark Knight, they had been in the works obviously for a year or so before that, and Denny was an editor, so he knew what was coming down the pike, right? Like he was reading those works and talking about them with Dick Giordano, talking behind the scenes with Jeanette Kahn, so he knew the direction that DC was heading, and he knew, oh, this is that new shit, and this is amazing. And probably for Denny, like he might have just recognized, wow, maybe comics is ready for this type of writing, which didn't really exist in the mainstream so much before, that had greater subtlety, greater nuance, and, you know, more transgressive content. I do think that what you said, though, Chris, is really, really interesting about just when you write in first person and you have more empathy for characters, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of aspiring writers or unsuccessful writers really kind of fall down at, is that they judge the characters, or they play favorites amongst the characters, and you can feel it in the writing. Like certain characters are like, oh, this is the scumbag character. This is like the despicable character. Here's my hero character. And, you know, nothing bad's going to happen to them because they're my hero or whatever. And then you can feel the disdain for the other characters. And like anytime I read a script or a comic or anything, and it feels clear to me that the writer has just complete disdain for some character without like a glimmer of understanding or empathy, it just makes it feel infinitely less interesting to me. Because I feel like that's your job as a writer. Your job is not to be the one judging these characters. Your job is to be the one telling a story that illuminates these greater truths in some way that we all can kind of take away our own meaning from. But I feel like when the writer takes on that job of like the judge who's going to tell you these characters are evil, these characters are good, and here is my judgment and my decree, then I'm just like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't really feel like I'm interested in reading that, because it closes the loop and it stops any kind of engagement for you as a reader, and it just feels like infinitely dumber. It feels more reductive, it feels more simple, and like I don't want to read a writer telling me that they don't like their own characters or that they're terrible. And so as much as it's uncomfortable, I think that there's something craft-wise and effect-wise that's really powerful about what O'Neill's doing here. And certainly Alan Moore does this, and other great writers do this, where you're showing these despicable characters, but then you're forcing the reader to empathize with things that they've gone through or things that have turned them in this way. And then, like you say, again, we come back to the gray areas of the question. And I'm sure that Steve Ditko probably hated what became of the question, his character, because Steve Ditko like hated this kind of thinking, didn't even believe in this kind of thinking. It's like, it's the complete antithesis of what Ayn Rand preached, and this sort of like very black and white reductionist approach to life. And I think O'Neil and Cowan, they go really hard in this other direction. Like, no, almost like everything's in the gray areas, and we're going to force you guys to just look at it and deal with it. And like, I think it's really powerful, and it's really unsettling. And I think that it's very effective storytelling.
Well, there's two things I want to say about that. You mentioned that, you know, that Denny O'Neil's editor, he's around Dark Knight when it's being conceived, when it's being pitched, when the scripts are coming in, when he's seeing the early pages from Miller and stuff like that. I don't think I was reading any Batman comics at the time when that came out. I don't think I was still very much of a Marvel guy. I think the only kind of DC stuff I was reading, you know, was again like I tend to love to read stuff that's not the popular mainstream books. Again, like I was reading like, you know, like Spectre. I remember reading that. I remember reading like Legion of Superheroes. I remember reading Vigilante, Teen Titans. Teen Titans was a big book, but it was again, you know, the fact that the Teen Titans are not the core heroes of those. I mean, those are the sidekick characters. I thought that was interesting. But I remember that in Dark Knight, the way the Joker is portrayed in that, you have a sense of like of empathy for this character. You know, like he's been in the insane asylum for a while. Now he's getting out. He goes on that talk show to try to like explain who he is. Right. Do all this kind of weird stuff to make you to reduce the clown character that he is, that we can kind of push away as like, oh, you're just like a psychopath that you know that I don't have to worry about. You're just constantly evil, like with no sense of other humanity. And I thought that was a really fascinating way that Miller did that, because then the way he goes around and like rapes Selena Kyle and like puts her in like the Wonder Woman costume and like all that kind of like the mind that he has is twisted as fuck, but it's still kind of like the imagination is very fertile, and it's you have to look at it in awe, because he's gonna like poison all those kids with the cotton candy, and it's like there's a really twisted, perverted genius in this. There's an imagination
that is to the horror.
That you kind of have to like find interesting in that, you know. Something that I remembered in this that I'm wondering. I've never seen the movie Blood Simple, but there's a line in here when he goes Blood Simple. Dashiell Hammett called it this raging, mindless lust to kill. And I'm like, did the Coen brothers take that line for their movie?
I had the same thought, Chris. I had the exact same thought. And then I thought, yes, they probably must have. And then that was followed by another thought for me, which was like, at that point, who the fuck was narrating? Was that Vic Sage narrating?
I think it is.
Yeah, because then I immediately had the thought, A, did the Coen brothers take that for their movie title? And then B, I thought, like, did Vic Sage grow up reading Dashiell Hammett? Like, how does he know that? Like, I instantly was
wondering. I mean, it's funny because it's like, you know, he's growing up in the orphanage. Like you have no idea what books are available to someone like that. You know, I mean, it's possible. I mean, I don't remember how I got interested. I think maybe I had seen Maltese Falcon. Did he write the Maltese Falcon?
Yeah, Dashiell Hammett did. Yes, he did.
Yeah, I remember seeing it as a kid, and I was like, "Who wrote this?"
Yeah,
I noticed that Dashiell Hammett based on the book, and I remember getting the book when I was about maybe like 12 or something like that, and reading it. It's a fascinating book.
Yeah,
and I always think there's a story in there about how those guys stole the Maltese Falcon before it showed up in San Francisco, where they're like in Turkey or some shit like that. And I kept saying to myself, that needs to be a movie.
You should find out, like, whatever studio has the rights to that, you should pitch that. The next time you have a general at that studio, just pitch the prequel to the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah,
you know,
I was like, there's a story.
Yeah,
it's like a chapter in that book when the guy, the professor played by Sidney Greenstreet, is telling them the story, and it's way more complicated in the book than it is in the movie because you're just trying to like get it down to, you know. And I always was like, because it's like, you know, the whole thing is the Falcon is like covered with this black lacquer. And they're like, they did it to hide it because it's this gold thing, and it's like it's this really interesting explanation. And I was like, why isn't that a movie? Or it's too fertile. It's like a throwaway story that they're trying to through to give it. It's like the origin story of the item in the piece that you're stealing, and it's enough to, in my opinion, to be its own movie. I think you could do it in a way, and I think you could do it in a way and not let anybody know. Why am I telling you this story? But you could do it in a way and not let it. Excuse me. And not let anyone know that it's the Maltese Falcon to the end of the movie. Like, they dip it in the black lacquer and they go, "That's the fault." Oh, fuck! So
that's a cool idea. That's a really cool idea. Yeah, you should talk to somebody at Warner Brothers about that. That would actually be really dope.
There's a woman over there who wants to give me a job for a television thing. I need to talk to her about.
There you go. Yeah, make a note of that. Yeah, it could be.
I forgot. I haven't thought about that in like 30 years. But okay.
Okay, so that was issue 5, basically. I think.
Issue 5.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was issue 5. It's a great issue, and again, I also want to just point out another brilliant cover by Cowan and Sienkiewicz. The covers on The Question are pretty much every single one of them is just a jaw dropper. Like it's just one brilliant cover after another. Cowan and Sienkiewicz are just an amazing team together. I love the way that their work actually looks together. I think it's very different than the way Cowan's work looks inked by Magyar or by Malcolm Jones III. And it's also different than how Cowan's work looks when he inks it himself. And I actually love, like we were talking about earlier, I love Dennis Cowan's work when he's inking himself on The Question quarterly later. That's actually some of my very favorite Cowan work, even though it has very bizarre coloring by Bill Ray. But it's just beautiful, beautiful line work. And I feel like the European influences in Cowan's work really come to the fore as he continues working. And especially when he starts inking himself, it looks a lot more like Sergio Tappi and a lot of these European masters that Cowan has mentioned were like giant influences on him artistically. And I see that a lot more when Dennis gets more full, complete control of the work. But before that, I think my favorite inker on Cowan in some ways might be Sienkiewicz, just even though it's in these brief spurts. I think it's just, these are gorgeous, like really iconic covers.
The thing about Dennis's work that I recall when he inks himself, it kind of feels like John Romita Jr.'s work in a way. At least the stuff that John Romita Jr. did on Spider-Man,
like the really good John Romita Jr.
Yeah. I don't know who was inking John Romita Jr. on Spider-Man or when he did that brief run on. It's not even a brief run. I just remember there's one issue of X-Men he did, Uncanny X-Men, like I think the introduction of Forge, and it was like I think the cover was one that was like a Barry Windsor Smith cover with it was like Wolverine, and it was like all this. It was like weird. It was like a red cover, all different shades of red, and it was like he was like pulled across with some weird ass background. I think it was like issue 184 or something like that, 185, and I was like, I mean, there's like this the way that Dennis does his own kind of like. The hatching, the cross hatching, and everything is so like it's so kinetic.
Yes.
You know, it feels like there's like electricity like running through like all the art. It's really, really fascinating. Kinetic's
a great word for it, Chris. It's very, very kinetic. It feels very alive to me. And back when, I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was a kid, I filled up whole sketchbooks, literally just copying Dennis Cowan's work on The Question and some other stuff, but mainly The Question. And it's funny you mentioned his cross-hatching because Dennis would also do like really just fascinating cross-hatching on people's faces that I had not seen other cartoonists do. And it was really interesting to me as an aspiring comic book artist. And he would do like specifically these really interesting sort of lines, like very just like lines that were really close together, like hatching kind of in between someone's eyelids and their eyebrows, just sort of like right above the eye. And that was something I hadn't seen any other artist do, but I fucking copied that shit like crazy when I was a kid and I was working on drawing faces and stuff. I started doing these very like Dennis Cowan cross-hatching sort of lines like above like the eyes and in between the eyelid and the eyebrow of all the characters I was drawing, because I just thought that it looked dope as shit. And I didn't see anyone else really doing that so much, but it was almost like a signature move in his inking or in his line work. That reminded me of how Chris Bachalo used to do it's kind of like these horizontal lines across the nose of every character, like the point of the nose. You know what I mean? So it was like Bachalo, when he was being inked by Mark Buckingham, they would do that together constantly, and it looked like every character was almost like drunk, because that was like comic book speak for being drunk, was like, you know, having a red nose or something. But I remember like loving that shit too. But it's funny when you're a kid, you're noticing all these little aesthetic details and idiosyncrasies and like signature moves that these different artists have, you know, and when you want to draw comics, you're just like cribbing and stealing from all of them. So for me, Dennis's line work on faces, that was the thing that just always blew me away. And I found it to be so unique and so compelling. And like you say, extremely kinetic and just super alive.
Well, it's interesting. We talk about Sienkiewicz as an inker. You know, I'm looking at issue 6. There's a house ad for The Shadow.
Oh, yeah.
Sienkiewicz did the pencils for.
We got to talk about that book too, by the way.
Because Sienkiewicz's pencils around, like, this is all post New Mutants.
Oh yeah,
and his style became something entirely different, and so much more like fluid. Like, it feels, to a degree, it kind of feels like this, like, you know, like volcanic lava spilling out. You know, it's very. It's
great description.
It's like when he works with Dennis, it's inking Dennis. It's interesting that his style so fits well with what Dennis is doing, and then because it's what he's doing too, it's like it just melds really well. I think it's really interesting work when they work together.
It totally is. So it's such a great combination, and I think I love your volcanic lava description of Sienkiewicz. I think that's perfect. I think that what they both have in their line work that is so unique, particularly to comics at this time, is I feel like they both have a deep well of emotion in their line work. Like there's a real emotion to their drawing, and it just doesn't feel like dead sort of artwork the way so much mainstream work felt like, you know, quote unquote hack work or jobbers or, you know, people who were just kind of going through the motions. Sienkiewicz and Cowan, their line work doesn't feel like that to me. It just feels extremely alive and just really, really compelling and unique for the time. And I would love to hear Dennis Cowan talk about his own feelings on the various inkers he'd worked with, because he worked with some very distinguished inkers who I think did a great job in their own ways. Rick Magyar, Malcolm Jones III, Bill Sienkiewicz, and, you know, other people. But like I say, when Dennis finally starts inking himself, I think it comes to life in a whole different way, and it's really, really beautiful work. And I'd be really curious to hear Dennis's thoughts on just how his line work was communicated and how it kind of matched up differently.
I mean, because I've seen some of his like raw pencils. I remember there was a book he did with Selwyn Hines, some voodoo story.
Yeah, it was a Vertigo. It was a Vertigo book. It was like Marie Laveau, Vertigo, something.
Yeah. And it's like I remember seeing like some. Just like the pencils of that somewhere, maybe some little house ad or something like that. And it looks, I don't know. He has a really fascinating style that the inkers do something to him. He does something different with himself. I know he was saying in that article you were reading that he, when he did that Batman run around issue 600, that he got inked by
Giordano.
Yeah, Dick Giordano. And that the regular penciler was mad because even he didn't get Dick Giordano to do his work.
That's awesome. Well, getting Giordano to ink your work was probably a real coup at DC at that time, because he was one of the big dogs there and a legendary inker.
I mean, and I mean, because he did that. I think he did Burns' work on Man of Steel,
right?
And he did that. He did Neil Adams' work on Superman vs. Ali. So it was like, I mean, there's just some highlight. I mean, I can look him up and just be like shocked by how much work he's done. But let's jump into issue 6.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Which again opens up with one of these amazing splash pages, single panel splash pages on page 1 of this guy about to pour acid on his face.
My God.
And I was like, what the fuck is this?
What are we reading?
Yes. It's that kid, Musto's kid, who tried to throw the bomb, the dynamite on the babies.
On the school children,
Who was back in issue 4. And you see him getting beat up by his father, and why he wants to pour acid on his face, because he wants to show. His dad says, look at that face. It's not a man's face. It's a sissy boy's face.
Yeah.
So he's trying to like burn his face to to get his dad's affection in some perverted way. This is such a bizarre set of, I just can't understand.
It's so fucked up.
I can't understand. It's like, I get it. I get what this guy's going through. I so do. But then like that on page 4 when he like dripping acid across, it's like, okay, dude. Again, it's great because there's no sound effects.
Yeah, and it's great, and it's great storytelling. It takes like literally 4 pages of this guy thinking of his father abusing him before he finally drops the acid on his face. You could see another writer doing this in 1 page, but O'Neil and Cowan, they let this moment breathe for 4 pages, so you really feel it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
and he's doing that little thing I love, that it's like the 8-panel grid on page 3 and on page 2 and 3, which is very much reminiscent of what your boy does this so well. Stray Bullets guy.
Oh yeah, David Lapham.
David Lapham does the 8-panel.
Yes,
like a master. It's really hard to do. I mean, although when Dennis does it here, I see that the bottom 2 panels are a little squarer than the top
you're right.
6. But Lapham does it, it's like they're all the same size squares.
Yes.
It's interesting. It's an interesting choice of why he did that. But
it is.
It's an interesting kind of restriction. Again, like I was saying earlier, technique, like the page design, panel design, composition within the panels. This feels like, you were saying in that article about Walt Simonson said his work was crap because it's not, and saying published work was crap. And then Harold Chaikin gave him a couple hours, said, man, this is how you got to make it work. You got to you got to make, the page has got to be designed. You can kind of see, here we are 6 issues in. I mean, his art is getting so much, it's been good throughout, but it's like he's now like shifting gears.
Yeah.
You can like see him shifting gears and putting in the turbocharged gasoline and shit like that. These pages.
Totally.
Really stepping up. Just stepping up.
Yeah.
It's a weird story about like a what's this about? It's about like a like some gun runner or something like that. Some gun runner. Well, you know what? But this goes into what we were saying earlier about the politics of the time.
Yeah.
He's talking about this guy is involved with Gusto's son burned his face, who wants him to run guns in South America. But the issue is about acid rain.
Yeah, the politics of that and like the environmental consciousness of this story, and it's actually really, really odd and totally really shows you a lot about Denny O'Neil's politics at that time. That the villain in the story, well, it's weird because there's a villain who's trying to kill a character who's also kind of a villain, and it's like okay, let me see if we can describe this simply for someone who hasn't read it. The kid who was gonna throw the bomb on the bus a few issues ago, where Vic Sage saved that bus full of school children, he's now pouring acid on his face at the beginning of this issue, as we said, to make himself look tougher to his dad. And after he does this, this kid has to bandage up his face, and now he looks like this really iconic character, like Negative Man from Doom Patrol or something, where he's got bandages all over his face.
Right.
And that kid is now, he is hired or asked by his father to go and kill the father of this other dude
the gun runner. The gun runner.
gun runner.
No. he's not asked by his father. He overhears.
Oh, he overhears. I'm sorry, you're right.
This guy killed, and he thinks that he can get in his father's good graces.
That's it. You're right.
After burning his face by going to kill this man. This guy. His name is like McEvey or something like that.
Yeah.
And oh no, his name is McVeigh.
Yes. And I think this is prior to Timothy McVeigh and that World Trade Center. It was prior to Timothy McVeigh, but I read that and I was like, fuck, this is just crazy. But this is, and this guy, Ian Agnes McVeigh created this company. He stepped down. Now he's living out retired in some farm community. And it's interesting. This is the issue where now we're at issue 6, where Vic Sage finally comes back to his job as a news reporter. And he's got to work part-time. Yeah. So Vic is back at work, but this dude who's living out in the countryside was like, I guess he's a rich guy whose company basically poisoned the environment, and he made a fortune off it.
Yeah.
And now he's chilling.
Now, what's really interesting in this issue? In page 17, after Vic Sage has been stabbed in the arm, he's coming back and he's driving with Tot. He's talking about, this doctor didn't give a shit that I got stabbed.
Yes.
And this is an interesting kind of setup for what happens 2 issues later.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen somebody plant a story like this. This is like a Mike Baron trick.
Mm-hmm.
Plant a story 2 or 3 issues before that was going to become the story. Like Mike Baron did this all the time in Nexus. All the fucking time. And I'm a throwaway. It's just throwaway at first. It's throwaway, but he's not. He was stabbed, and it makes sense to the context of this story. But when it comes up 2 issues later,
you don't think it's going to come back. Like you don't. It's like a throwaway. You don't at all think it's going to come back. And I think there was very few writers in comics that were adept at kind of juggling multiple plot threads like this. I think Chris Claremont would do kind of stuff like this in his way, and I think maybe Paul Levitz in Legion of Superheroes was juggling multiple plot lines, and he would kind of move them to the front and the back, issue to issue. But you're right. This was a very unusual and kind of rare trick / setup for a comic writer to do, 2 issues beforehand. It's like, it's such a quick, elegant throwaway. I was shocked, honestly, when it came back 2 issues later and it became the whole storyline.
I know. I mean, but the thing is, in these other comics, like Paul Levitz, when he's doing it in Legion of Superheroes, it's happening to a degree because it's like he's showing you one of their villains do something. Like
okay, no, you're right. That's true. That those characters are actually part of the fabric of the story, where with what O'Neill's doing here, it's kind of on another level because it just feels like it's a complete throwaway mention of a doctor or an intern at a hospital. You have no reasonable expectation that's ever going to come back around.
Yeah, and it makes sense because it's like he's apathetic because the town's apathetic.
Yes.
And then we jump into Ian Angus McVeigh when he's dealing with the kid who burned his face, and he's gonna have tea with him, and he's like, you know what? I'd rather I hoping I'd kill myself because I made all this money and I poisoned the environment for doing it.
Yeah, and this was a fascinating scene because the bandage-faced kid, who's looking extremely iconic, and by the way, I just want to point out an incredible Dennis Cowan visual, just as the kid is on his way to confront this dude. I think it's when the kid it's like on page 16, it's when the kid overhears the father, that scene that you mentioned. Last panel on page 16 with the kid's face with the bandages and the glasses. Like, tell me that's not a great panel. Like, that's just stunning.
Because he's using
it's that duo shade again. I think it's duo shade. Yeah.
I mean, it is because of how faint it is, but it's also colored.
Yeah.
It's blue with. It's just. I mean, this is a master class on how to do shadowing, but still give a close up. That's just masterclass.
Yeah, right. It's like that floored me when I got to that panel. I just thought, God damn.
If you look at his jacket, he's got like a fur collar.
Yeah.
Down below the fur, there's like the material of the jacket has also got that duotone on it. So it's like this very subtle way of playing in the shadows, but not going to silhouette.
Yeah.
The way that you could easily do this. You know,
it's amazing. And I'm glad you pointed out the fur collar, because like it's such an unusual and awesome decision for Cowan to make, that this like fucked up kid with his face burned off and the bandages has like a fur collar around his jacket. Like,
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
It's such a unique choice for the jacket. And now that you say that, I notice on the very next page that Tot, when he's driving with Vic, Tot is wearing like one of these puffy, like kind of like camping jackets.
Yeah.
Like, and that's another very specific choice. So yeah, Cowan is like really killing it on just the very specific and unique fashion choices of all these characters. And I don't mean that lightly. I mean that as a real compliment, because most comic artists just don't know shit about fashion and don't make choices. They just kind of draw generic looking clothes on people. And Cowan's not doing that at all.
No, he's did a really good job. I mean, even when they shows the old man a couple pages later, I mean, this is such a great thing when he's like, you know, I bought this. What he bought like 15. He bought like some 15,000 acres of fish and game and plant life when he saw this. He's probably younger, maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah,
and then when he gets here to retire, it's like a dead lake. It's just like
and he realizes it's his fault that his company is the one that's poisoned the environment for his own property.
Yeah, the irony is shocking.
It's amazing. And that's such an amazing scene, because the bandage face kid shows up on the dude's porch at his estate, whatever, and he says, "I've come to kill you." And the guy is like, "Huh, all right. I guess my son probably sent you, right? Or whatever." Like, yeah, that makes sense. Don't shoot me in cold blood. Come on inside. We'll warm up. Have some tea. Truth is, I don't mind dying. Like, it's such an anticlimactic, amazing moment.
And you kind of watching, like, what the fuck is wrong with him? And you realize that he's fucked himself.
Yeah.
Like, the one thing he wanted, you know, and then Musto gets there, not knowing that his son is there. And then he mistakes his son for the question because he's wearing a trench coat and a hat, tries to shoot up the old man and his son, who he thinks is the question. And then the question is there, you know, and he takes out like all Musto's people. And then, you know, it's a great moment where Musto charges into the house, like ready to kill who he thinks is the question.
Yeah.
Sprays all these bullets. And then when he's switching magazines, his son shoots him.
Yeah. And it's all silent.
Yeah.
Like, no gunshots, all silent. Actually, those two pages, again, it's like hearkening back to, like you said, that almost the G.I. Joe silent issue. That's one of the only reference points I could even think of for 80s comics doing this in America. But yeah, this is crazy for a climactic moment to be 2 pages of silence.
And then what's crazy is, you know, he's got to get shot out. The dad gets shot, and he looks over his dad's body. And then he like rips the bandages off and you see this guy's face.
This is so intense.
And his face looks like ass face from fucking Preacher.
Like Preacher
which is like 10 years later. 10 years later, Preacher does a torn up face. This guy's half his lip is missing, his eye is missing, some hair, and he's like, "Now do you love me?"
Oof. Oh man, it is rough. Like that face, like Cowan really kills it. Cowan and Magyar kill it on that face because it kind of lives up to the weight, you know, like you're wondering the whole time, how bad does this kid's face look? Pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, terrible. Yeah. Absolutely fucking terrible. I mean, I kind of was wondering, is the dad even dead? But, I mean, he is dead, but it almost feels like a really just. It was interesting too is that these books are it's like 27, 28 pages.
They're long. Yeah, I kept noticing that, man. Comics used to be so fucking generous back then. Like, good Lord. Like, it was $1.50 and you would get like 20, they're like 27 to 30 pages. Some of these are like 29, 30 pages. So you're getting almost 30 pages of story, and you're getting a 2 or 3 page letter column, plus you're getting an editorial from Dick Giordano or Jeanette Kahn or whoever. Like, Jesus, man, for a buck.
On the top of the thing,
for $1.50. This is like such generous sort of storytelling, and you get so much content for your money. I know we've talked about this a lot, but it's like just modern mainstream comics do not compare to this in any way, shape, or form. Like
I think I love about this question is that the opening, the inside cover of all these comics is everyone had a different like editorial from someone high up in the food chain at DC.
Yeah.
I mean, like this one is Roy Thomas giving an obituary to Gardner Fox.
Mm.
You know, and it's like a personal remembrance by Roy Thomas. This 2-column thing is probably like 500 words, probably 500 words, but like maybe 700 words. Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's pretty fucking amazing.
You get so much, like we've talked about this a lot, but it's like you get so much content, man. Like it's such an experience in between these covers. It's easily a half an hour plus of entertainment, and there's just a lot to take in. So yeah, it's quite a package.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and 30 pages, like 27, 28, 29, 30 pages, that surprised me when I realized how long these issues were. But they don't feel long, and I feel like the extra pages, that's what gives you the chance to really let some of these moments breathe, because that's why we can get 2 or 3 or 4 silent pages in these issues, but they don't feel like they're slight stories.
Not at all. Not at all. Because if this is like Warren Ellis doing like Fell, it'd be like he couldn't handle it.
No,
he couldn't handle it.
Yeah, it would be over so quick. Yeah, that was another showstopper of an issue. That's another really terrific self-contained story. And after that opening 4-issue story arc, I feel like the Question really goes on a run of these self-contained issues that are just fucking jaw droppers. Like there's just a bunch of self-contained issues that are just like home run, phenomenal stories. And this goes on for a while. Like we read up to issue 8, but that's what I remember about the book, was just feeling like it had these one and done stories that were just so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's fascinating about, again, let's jump into issue 7 real quick. Because it's like, this is another weird story that I don't really, I couldn't understand what was happening in this. But there's this character who looks kind of like Wolverine.
Yeah, it's a lot like Wolverine.
But it's not. His name is Volk, and which means people in German, and he's like a gypsy. It's just like this. What's kind of interesting about reading comics from the 80s is there's a sense of like this character, okay, maybe he's 60. He would have been alive, but he's got resonance back to World War II, and the John Mayer Hatch had resonance back to Vietnam, and it's like nowadays there's not that kind of like depth of character design. Like you really couldn't have a character today who was like a World War II survivor, because he'd be like 90, you know, or something like that. You know, so it's like that you can't even really do like a Vietnam War vet right now, because he'd be like in his mid 70s.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like it's interesting that I mean, like what you could draw upon from relatively recent history. Because look, this book was published 35 years ago, right? We were saying that, right?
35 years ago blows my fucking mind. But yeah, 35 years.
So if you pull back 35 years ago from this, it's 1952.
Yeah.
You know, so we're in the middle of the Korean War in terms of like the difference between when this book is published and now. You know what I'm saying? Like when this book came out, and it's just what you could do. I mean, plus you could pull characterizations from what they're about. I also think it kind of adds to like the level of like, it's not like it's naive, but it's because there's a lot of violence in this, a lot of crazy violence in this. But society changed quite a bit. It became a lot more cynical in a way that is not reflected in the comics of then. That are reflected in the comics of now.
Yeah, you're right. There's an earnestness. There's like a real earnestness, which, for me, often makes for better storytelling. But you're right. It's something that you don't see nearly as much.
Here's something fascinating to me. Again, let me know something about like where Hub City is set. In issue 7, or on page 7, where they're hiring like some thugs to kind of take out. I think they want to take the mayor out, right?
Yeah.
There's a guy from Detroit, a guy from Wilmington, Delaware, and a guy from Montreal.
Yeah, I love the way the guy from Montreal is dressed. Also, he's got like a yellow beret and an orange jacket.
I mean, but like, and also again, Dennis. All of these are all white guys. their faces all look different.
So different. I'm glad that you observe this and that you keep pointing this out, because you're right. I hadn't thought about this, but you're right. Dennis Cowan draws some of the most distinct faces on people, and they don't feel like they're all kind of cut from the same kind of rubric or the same sort of mold. They're not just versions of like one artist's face. They're all very different shapes, you know, and that is like so unusual, and it's great to see.
Well, yeah, because like certain artists who are great artists, like John Byrne or Alan Davis,
yeah,
their faces. I mean, like if he's drawing a woman, like is there a difference between like Sue Stormer's face and Jean Grey's face and She-Hulk's face? Like if
the same shape.
If they weren't colored or inked, you wouldn't be able to determine who was who.
You're totally right. That's a great point. They're the same shape, and these artists are some of Dennis' contemporaries and peers from that time, like your Alan Davises, your John Burns, your George Perez's, and I think Perez also. It's like there's a certain shape to the faces that generally repeats, and you don't see that with Dennis Cowan. Dennis Cowan is doing something very different.
Yeah, so this is when Vic is trying to get back into Myra's life. They're not gonna get together, but there is like a pull from their previous relationship, and she just like, I don't want to fuck you because I'm married, and I have to respect that, even though I don't like my husband. Yeah. So you have to, like, it's really like you got to wait until can get rid of him before I can. It's just page 10 where they're like, you know, if this is really one of the, it's just, yeah. She goes, look, I believe we have to stand by what we say. He goes, I hear you, because if we don't keep our word, we betray, and that's one of the real sins. You know, she goes, I still have strong feelings for you, but if I broke my vows and made love to you, then you wonder if I was buying your help. And what's worse is I couldn't be certain I wasn't. I mean, it's like very like, it's like a damning situation to be. I mean, like, you know, like, and almost, it feels, there's something like very human and truthful about this. Yeah. Because in other kind of people's ways, they're like, well, they're just going to fuck. Mm-hmm. You know, so we know that there's a sense of hope between their relationship. But you read this and you don't know if there's any hope between their relationship. Yeah.
And you realize that if Vic is going to help her or if she's going to help him, like, it's not simply because they're fucking. It's not because of all of these baser instincts. It's because he really wants to help her. And there are deep feelings here. And I think it's really just, frankly, good writing from O'Neil, because he's building that tension, right? Like, he's making us wonder, like, what's going to happen with them? It's not an easy payoff for these characters.
No, not at all. Not at all. You know, so then, like, you know, like, the questions go after this guy named Volk, who's like some sort of like underworld player who's trying to retire.
Yeah, and he's a member of the Roma people, the Roma community, and he refers to himself as a gypsy at one point. But this also kind of points to, I think, how times have changed, because I know that the word gypsy is considered offensive by a lot of people these days, and it's like a word that has really fallen out of fashion in terms of it being okay to say. And I think that it's considered like, oh no, you need to say the Roma people, because I think the origins of the word gypsy even like it connects, I believe, to the word gyp and like people gypping people, and there were like negative connotations to that word, and so a lot of people find the word highly offensive these days. But back here in this comic, you know, O'Neil has the character identifying himself with that word, even though he is one of the Roma people, and apparently was not considered offensive back in 87 at all.
It was interesting because it's kind of like, I feel like the word gypsy is taken on more of like a at least in America, like this kind of like flighty, almost like descendant of a hippie type of connotation. Whereas yeah, you wouldn't call these people from Europe, like the Romani, you wouldn't call them that anymore. Right. You know, right. And you're right about the origins of that word too. Again, but this guy's like, he's telling you like he got beat. You know, like you know, again, the gypsies were considered undesirables by Hitler, and they were getting rounded up and fucked up in World War II, and it's like this guy his eye got whipped out.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Oh god, he had a tragic backstory, and we should say this guy, this Wolverine looking. When we say he looks like Wolverine, he looks like Logan. Like he looks like Logan. Yeah, he's got like that really bizarre, unique Wolverine hairdo with that kind of a shape to it. But also
kind of weird chin hair.
Yeah, like some very extreme mutton chop sideburns that almost turn into a beard. They're so huge, they're coming around, they almost connect. And he's just a very violent character who's a criminal who's come to Hub City from Europe to make some kind of a deal with the mayor, but the mayor's too drunk to make the deal with him. And so now he's here, and it looks like who? Okay, so these three guys are being hired to kill Volk. And then the storyline, kind of, we see the Vic and Myra stuff you mentioned, and then it's a fairly simple story. We have a scene with Vic and Tot kind of meditating and talking and hanging out a little bit more, and then we see Volk is with the prostitute, and he's given her a very generous tip. Apparently, he's handing her $1,000 bill, and then Vic, as the Question, goes to confront Volk. It's a pretty simple story. He breaks into Volk's, room he's staying in while he's here in Hub City to do this criminal activity. And then Volk kind of just tells Vic about this history that he had in Romania, and Russia, and like this trauma that he went through. And then Volk basically describes how he was a wild child who was left for dead in the wilderness. And then he says that was when he lost his eye from Nazis whipping him. And then he was left to die. And then a pack of wolves found him as a child, and this pack of wolves took care of him. And he says, they brought me food, kept me warm, nurtured me until I recovered. And when I could travel by myself, I left them. And there's the most hilarious, kind of adorable panel on page 18 of like the adult Volk now waving goodbye to the pack of wolves that has raised him. And the panel is like drawn quite seriously, but it also kind of made me chuckle because it's like this very like buff, like, tough
like
looking guy.
This is kind of like this wild child, like Mowgli type of situation.
Yeah, but this guy's now an adult and he's looking all ripped, and he's like waving goodbye to the wolves who are like standing on a cliff staring after him, like it was.
Well, that's why it's kind of weird. That's why when at the end of the story, here's a panel I didn't even recognize until I get to. I'm looking at it again now. On page 18, when he's telling the Question the story, he goes, I have these dreams. And there's a quick flash panel of a wolf with his eye missing and a scar, just like the scar that Volk has.
Oh, yeah. I see that. It's right here. And, yes.
It's like I kind of didn't catch this at first, or catch the significance of it, because I didn't see the thing with the eye slash. Didn't quite register when I first was going through it. But he just kind of says, I'm ready to die. I'm trying to get back to where I came from.
Yeah.
And then those three guys got killed who got hired by the guy from Montreal and Detroit, stuff like that. Like Volk and the Question take these guys out in a pretty brutal way.
Yes, I love the coloring on page 22 on those first two panels where the assailants kind of break into Volk's motel room, and Volk just fucking, I don't know, what is that? Is that a knife of some kind he throws at them? But the panels are colored all red, and they look very striking.
If you look at the page before, he's got like a whip that's got like
a knife at the end of it, right?
It's got several knives, like a cat of nine tails type of thing at knives. It looks like it's 7 or 8 knives, whatever, not 5 or 6 knives on the tail of this whip, and he like whips them, and the knives hit as the whip tip. I mean, that's pretty fucking brutal.
It's very brutal. It's very brutal. Those two panels are very striking, and props to, I guess it's Tatiana Wood doing the coloring here, but that's a really bold choice for the coloring on those two panels, and I think it's very effective. Just bright, just a really pop red, and it really kind of hits hard when you see those panels.
Yeah, I mean, in the next, and then it's Volk. He's going to kill these guys. Kill the last guy. He doesn't even kill the. Oh no, the one guy just says, "I'm not even." The one guy from Detroit is like, "I ain't fucking around with these guys." He just leaves.
Yeah.
And then Volk goes and kills the last guy who hired everyone and gets shot himself. and he dies. And this is when it gets metaphysical again. He's like, you know, he goes, for years I was two bodies, one soul. Now I unite, I survive.
Yes. Yeah. This is amazing.
It's kind of like I was saying, it's like that's why that panel with the wolf, when he's saying goodbye to the wolf, like didn't really, I know it was a little funny, but it's like it meant that it's like he left part of his soul there.
Yeah, right. And
know,
it's also
with the wolves.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me too, now that we're talking about it, of like Denny O'Neil's kind of ideas from issue 2, where that opening voiceover that we read from issue 2, where Denny O'Neil's saying there is no such thing as death. There's only time and motion and our mind, but there is no such thing as death. Your energy is going to go somewhere else and return somewhere else. And I think it's interesting in a very different form that O'Neill's coming back to the same idea that there is no death. And there's no death for the question at the beginning, and there's no death for Volk here. There's only a change of form and, you know, a change, but it's not what we think of, what we perceive as death. So you're right. It's getting extremely metaphysical once again, which is what the question does so well.
You know, what's fascinating is the final page of this. It's like, you know, he gets told by Volk where you can find like some sort of like information. Yeah. To solve this riddle about what he's saying, and he's got to go to Bavaria.
Yeah, and he goes. Vic Sage goes to Bavaria.
He says, "Fuck my job. I go check this out." But it's like, again, this is masterclass storytelling on this final page.
Yeah,
he's got 10 panels. It's like 2 rows of 5 panels apiece to tell this moment of when Vic Sage arrives at this tree that's shaped like a question mark. You know, to find, and he's confronted by the wolf that has the eye like cut out, or whipped out, the same scar mark. I don't know. There's something very poignant and beautiful about the way that page is executed.
Yeah,
to me.
No, I agree.
And I almost feel like some sort of Terrence Malick type of shit.
Yeah,
you know?
I can see that because it's very much like in nature, in this kind of like natural landscape, dealing with these very metaphysical human concerns. And yeah, I think it's a beautiful ending to the story. And also, I can't believe I didn't even think about it until just looking at it again now. But the fact that the tree where Volk has directed Vic Sage to come is shaped like a question mark, like duh, the story is the question. Vic Sage is the question. I didn't get that till right this second looking at it again, but I'm like, oh yeah, there's that motif once again of the question, kind of like all of us are asking these questions in life about existence and the afterlife, etc. And Vic Sage is just like any of us, constantly like grasping for an answer. And now in this weird story, once again, he's sort of told the same message that he learned at the beginning, that there is no such thing as death, Vic Sage. Like that maybe that's not the right question, but here is the answer. Like there is no death. And it is a really poignant ending. Because I guess we should say to people, when Vic gets to Bavaria, what he realizes is he comes face to face with a wolf. And this wolf has a similar scar on its eye to this gangster Volk. And Vic realizes like, oh shit, Volk, is that you? And then Vic just kind of smiles to himself and says like what Volk's last words were, which were someone should know.
There's something interesting in the in the letter column of this book. Somebody whose name is just me. That's all it says. Just me. Doesn't give a name. He goes, "Dear Mike, this is the best ongoing series since Infinity Incorporated. Every aspect is amazing. The writing, the art, the coloring, and most interesting of all, the absence of noise words in quotes. This has been the most constantly annoying feature in other comics. I'm overjoyed that you have left this out of this already amazing series. Whoever made this decision deserves a hearty handshake and pride of knowing that he has made a difference. What does everyone else think?" Me, in Decatur, Illinois. Then Mike Gold is responding. There's been a lot of comments about the absence of sound effects. All positive, I must admit. So sound effects fans should check out the classic Harvey Kurtzman and Wily Wood story sound effects from Mad number 20, February 1955, whereas the original edition is rather pricey. Our old buddy Russ Cochran is almost done reprinting the entire Mad comic run in 4-volume hardcover set. I guess there's probably an issue where they didn't do the effects or they did do the effects. I don't know. Fascinating is that the recommended reading is Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse.
Oh, wow. That's some heavy recommended reading. Denny O'Neil, he is really trying to get all the readers to kind of level up in our reading habits.
Yeah.
He's like, come on, everybody, keep up. Let's all go on this metaphysical journey together.
Okay, so now we're going to get to our final issue. Talk about for this episode.
And it's quite
your brain.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
Called Mikado. Now, they open up with another fucking amazing splash panel page. The thing that really got me the most about this is it's a man who is in his underwear, tied up, hanging upside down.
Yes.
And I'm looking at this, and I go, "Oh, he's got a chain of a cross hanging around his face that's kind of come off." But what's more shocking is when I'm looking at this, see his hands are tied.
Yeah.
Are tied to his feet.
I didn't notice that.
His legs are bent, and I'm like, is this guy being hung by his knees are bent? This is fucking crazy. And then I turn the page, and lo and behold, he is being hung. So like he's kind of hog-tied, but hung by his feet, and he's hanging over this boiling cauldron. Yeah. And this guy named Mikado, this Japanese guy,
or so we think.
So we think is dropping him into this barrel to be scalded.
Yeah.
And then we come back to so this is now we harken back to the episode from issue 6.
Issue 6, yeah. We're going back in time.
Vic Sage has been stabbed, and he's hearing some information, and this when the doctor says to him, "Hey man, you got stabbed, you should report to the police, but but why bother?" And it's kind of interesting that and then you hear this little story where this guy's like, "Dr. Spaulding, did you hear? They just brought in a man to the burning unit, a transfer from upstate, a man named Chester Franny. Remember the name? Franny? The kid I treated last month, the baby? The one who was scalded in the bathtub? Well, this is her father, and he was scalded too in the exact same way. So that dude who was lowered into the cauldron up front, you realize that he had burned his baby in hot water, and so he suffered the same fate. I mean, that's pretty fucked up."
Yeah.
Then the next page is this dude named Gordon who has this wife and 2 kids, looks as who might be pregnant too, and they're skinny. They're so skinny they look like they're malnutrition, like they got those sunken eyes and cheekbones from no lack of food. Yeah. And then he's up here. This looks like he weighs 250 pounds with this with a full turkey. Yeah. And a full ham. Yep. All this food on the table, and he's letting his kids starve.
Yeah.
And he like slams food in the wife's face. And he says some shit like, he goes, "Hey slut, listen, I married you. I said I give you bastards a name. I didn't say nothing about feeding them, did I?" I mean, that's
it's so dark. It's so fucked up.
There's a level of inhumanity in that statement that I know he read this. I know he read this in some police report or something like that. Because it's like that guy when Andrew Kevin Walker wrote 7. It's like he witnessed shit. He was working at that Times Square Tower Records. So he was like, I can't believe that humanity stoops to this low. And that's what he kind of like put into the 7. Then this guy Gordon, he goes outside. Someone offers him a ride because he's some sloppy dude, and it's Mikado, the Japanese guy from the beginning.
Yeah,
shoots him in the neck, paralyzes him, and then he skins him.
Yeah, yeah.
This is just skin him. We take that back. This is skin him. He cuts the meat off his bones. They say something called a flint.
Yeah,
so I never heard of the word flint.
Flint.
I forgot to look it up.
I'd never heard of that word either.
But I guess it's what they do to animals when they butcher them. It's just fucking brutal.
It's just horrific. I mean, 7 is a good reference point because I don't know any other stories that I can think of, really popular entertainment stories that go into these kind of dark places so consistently and unrelentingly as what they're doing here with the question. And And we should mention also that in between the Mikado story, the reason that we're saying we've caught up with the story from 6 issues ago is we actually see the moment that Vic described to Tot in the car in issue 6, right? Like we see it here after the Mikado intro with the guy boiling over the cauldron. We see Vic at the hospital and he's being treated by a doctor who's a black doctor, and he's talking to Vic and he says, "Mr. Sage, you got one tetanus shot coming up." And then he says, so how did it happen? Like the reason Vic was in there. And then this is where Vic tells the guy, "I was mugged." And then the doctor says like, "Oh, you know, you ought to tell the cops." Well, on second thought, why bother? You know, stay out of trouble. And this was the interaction that Vic had talked with Todd about in issue 6 that you and I thought, the throwaway that we thought was so brilliant, because there was no way you'd ever know you were going to come back around and see that. But here we see it. And now this doctor, who was just, you know, a character mentioned in an offhand way in issue 6, now has become a character in this issue 8, and he's going to become a far more important character as we go forward.
Well, what's interesting is that this guy Gordon, the fat guy who gets the meat chopped off his bones. One of the cops calls this in to try to get some money. He's going to call it in, you know.
Yeah.
And then now you're back with Myra and Vic Sage, and they've heard they not called into the cops because they're calling in the news.
Yeah.
And Vic says, "Hey, I remember something I heard a couple months ago." So you realize that the scene from the beginning of this and issue 6 was a few months ago.
Right.
And now it's like an interesting little, and right here, this page is Myra and Vic. Somehow this reminds me, this art reminds me of early Jackson Geist.
Oh, I could actually see that. Yeah, that's a good point. Something about the way he's drawing Myra here also.
Yeah, the way Myra and the way Vic is positioned on that desk, it's very interesting.
That's a great pull, Chris. Yeah, I hadn't thought that. I wouldn't have thought that, but that's a really great pull. And Jackson Geist is a terrific artist in his own right, and he's also really great at body language and things just kind of feeling natural.
Oh, for sure. What was that book that he did that I remember reading, some weird ass title? I don't remember now.
Was it recent?
Resurrection Man. Remember he did the book of Resurrection Man?
Yeah, that was like a DC book. I think it was Andy Lanning writing it.
Yeah, it's a DC book in the 80s. Yeah. And they were doing all this wild ass shit. And here it is where I think Vic and Myra are trying to have a relationship still, but
Resurrection Man. I think Resurrection Man was later than the 80s.
Maybe it was. Maybe it's the 90s, early 90s.
Yeah, look it up, 'cause it was. I want to say it was Abnett and Lanning writing it. I think it might have been before they broke up.
So yeah, but did Jackson Geist do some of that Flash? Some of the
Jackson Geist, he was definitely drawing other shit in the 80s. He drew Flash for Mike Barron at one point, I think. With Mike Barron.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Resurrection Man was the 90s for the record. It was
Okay. Yeah. So then it's like questions trying to figure out about this killing. He has got two choices, and he and then he gets he's talking with Tot, and he tells him about the crime and punishment thing, and he makes a quote from Gilbert and Sullivan. It's called the Mikado, and that's where the title of the book comes. I mean, the title of the villain. And then you meet this guy, this doctor. What was his name? Dr. Spaulding.
Right.
He's walking down the street and he's going through some bad neighborhood. Dr. Spaulding's black. He meets these two black thugs who could have killed him. And they all have distinctive looks for black dudes. The one guy's got a knife still, but it's just like got a Run DMC hat on.
I think he's wearing a Beastie Boys shirt, by the way, which is a unique choice, also.
Who's wearing a Beastie Boys shirt?
That guy with the Run DMC hat.
Oh, he is. He is. Yeah, he is. He totally is. Yeah, totally is. Totally. Again, this is Dennis just pulling. He's making it pop, making it current.
Totally, yeah.
In a way that I'm sure other people weren't.
Yeah, he's loading it with Easter eggs for those who are looking.
And then he's doing his little procedural detective stuff. The drug dealer who he thought might have been responsible for these killings is not responsible. And then he goes and he's like, "Oh, and here's Mikado killing someone again, taking someone's kidney out." because this is a great story too. A doctor with gambling debts took out a woman's kidney. I mean, that's pretty fucking. Just the level of like what the fuck is going on here is just insane.
You're right. Hub City again. And you're right. It's almost just like a throwaway line here, but that could be a whole issue in itself.
Yeah, or it could be an episode of like Law and Order or something like that. I mean, it's crazy. You know, and then this question, he finds out where Mikado lives. He meets Mikado, was the black guy's Dr. Spaulding.
And I just have to say, at that moment after we hear about the kidney or whatever, when we cut to Vic Sage at home with Tot, just look at the pose that Vic Sage is in as we cut.
He's doing some weird ass thing where he's like so contorted. Like his feet, like he's doing a back bend to the point that his feet are touching where his chin is.
Yeah, it's like
I'm not even describing it.
It's incredible. It's like he is just in such an insane twist of a shape. It looks like the most advanced yoga that one could imagine. And he's just kind of casually doing this while he's having a discussion quite casually with Tot, while his feet are kind of like wrapped around his face and his whole body's contorted.
I mean, it's like a back. I mean, it's like I've seen women do this. Like do yoga and but I've never seen a dude do it.
Yeah,
it can't be done. I've just never seen a dude do it.
Very difficult, but I love how casual this is. Yeah, it's wild. Just a scene where like a lesser comic would just have Tot and Vic like standing next to each other talking. Like the question is like we're making such great choices. Like I think Tot is doing some kind of scientific shit because he's got like beakers and stuff that he's pouring while he's talking, and Vic's doing high level yoga. It's so cool and creative, and it's all these choices that really play into who the characters are.
Yes, wild. So then the rest of the story is the next part of the story is question discovers Spaulding, finds out he's the killer. They have some interesting kind of like conversation, and you know, the Spaulding and the black guy gets this drop on the question, shoots him with a tranquilizer dart. Not tranquilizer dart, but something that paralyzes him. It's like a paralytic.
Yeah.
And he's about to fucking kill the question, but the question keeps talking and makes him think and tells him about, you know, I mean, he's saying, I'm doing this stuff to restore the balance. Again, it's like this. He goes, well, no, my friend, not for revenge. Rather, I need to restore some balance. Every day, for years, for decades, I've witnessed the results of wanton cruelty, hideous suffering of the innocent. It's the reason I became a physician to alleviate the suffering. I thought that would make it right, but it didn't. And then he's crying in this panel.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Like he knows what he's doing is wrong. And then he's about to, you know, kill the question. The question goes, well, you know what? I'm not an innocent bystander. You're killing me, but you know what? You should kill me because of all the shit that I went through. I whooped people's asses.
Yeah.
I hit a girlfriend. I broke her nose. I beat up a professor. You know, a 60-year-old man who had asthma. I mean, it's all this stuff. And then he's like, so you should be killing me because I'm one of the people that you should be killing. You know, but he goes, but did all this bad shit, but here's some good shit that I did.
Yeah.
You know, the bomb is all stuff he's in as the question. He goes, so I'm not innocent, but should I deserve to die? And then, what's his name? Spaulding's like, well, it's a good argument. I guess I'm not going to kill you. And then Spaulding puts the Mikado mask on, and he's got his sophisticated, like, opiate drug, and and the question is still suffering from, like, the paralytic. And dude just stabs himself with the drug, collapses.
Yeah, and that's a great page, by the way. Like the page is beautiful panel composition by Cowan right there.
Oh yeah,
very unique and super dramatic panel composition. Very odd.
It's like I saw Matt Wagner do something like this with a Grendel one time, where it's kind of like there's a panel. It's like it feels like it's like a clock hand swishing, you know, so it shows you like the passage of time. It's like in this page, it's like he gets stabbed and he got to fall down, and the drugs got to get him, and then Vic Sage has to he's gonna wake up from the paralytic, and then he's gonna turn the mask off and turn the Satan, and he goes into the bathroom. So it's kind of like this, like these shards of time are being fractured away, and the panel is designed to look like that. Again, Dennis showing masterclass, work with like how to do time, like how to show elapsed time on a comic page. It's brilliant.
Yep.
And then, Vic Sage goes into the bathroom to wash his face, take a little quick shower, goes outside, and Mikado was gone.
Yeah.
Who we thought was dead is gone. And all that's left is that syringe that maybe had nothing in it.
Right.
Maybe had something in it.
That was a very compelling ending to kind of leave things here. Vic Sage is now in an empty room. He sees the empty room, and he knows without searching further that the Mikado is gone. Deep inside himself, he feels the beginning of laughter, which is a very interesting way to end things here. And Vic Sage is, perhaps going to face the Mikado again on another day in the future. But yeah, I remembered reading this story when I was a kid. This was one of the standouts to me when I was young, just because it was like such an unusual story about this doctor wearing the Mikado mask and having this rhyme from the Gilbert and Sullivan opera that he says when he kills people, and being so emotionally invested and conflicted in the work he's been doing in this city, that ultimately he snaps and just decides life's not fair and he wants to make it fair. But, this was not the kind of story in 1986 that was your average done in one comic. And again, it's the question, just living in these gray areas. And like you were saying, Chris, Dennis Cowan just continues to really progress and increase the facility of like his artwork and the original panel compositions, and just the way that he's approaching this as he's getting more and more comfortable with this world and with this story. I feel like Dennis's work is just looking increasingly tremendous as we move forward, and these splash pages just continue to be killers. And yeah, man, I feel like the question largely, I feel like it holds up very well in terms of my memory of it. Like I said earlier, like there's brief moments in the storytelling here and there that I would say where, some of Denny O'Neil's writing in moments here and there is like, it's a little clunky, some of the transitions, whatnot. Like if you wanted to nitpick, there's moments that could be done a little more elegantly and whatever. But I think the context that we all have to remember when we look at these old comics is that they were on a monthly schedule. And so to be putting out work at this level on a monthly schedule is frankly pretty astonishing, because it's not like this was a quote unquote graphic novel that someone had a year of their life to work on every last piece of it. Like, no, this was under the gun, deadline driven work where they're just taking these huge swings, these big, ambitious story swings. And so, if they're connecting on 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 moments that they're going for, and maybe like I might quibble on a moment here and there, like, all things being equal, this is a pretty phenomenal piece of work. And I feel like it really should be talked about and remembered more, which is why I'm glad that we took the time to talk about this. Because as I remember, even beyond these first 8 issues, it never falls off. Like in my memory, it continues to be a very strong and like powerfully inventive and just really just wild series as it moves forward. So this is definitely a book that's very worthy of people going back and looking at again. I think it's largely out of print. I think there was a collection of trade paperbacks that was put out at one point, but I looked recently and it seemed like a lot of them were quite expensive on eBay. So I don't think this is a work that DC has kept perpetually in print the way it should have.
Let me interrupt you. I saw on Dennis's Facebook or Twitter yesterday or Thursday, DC is putting out like a question omnibus.
Oh, thank God!
A hardcover omnibus thing.
That's awesome.
I think it'll be out. It's something, and Dennis didn't even know about it. He was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this."
Oh, that's fucking great! Oh, that makes me
crazy.
That makes me really happy to know the work will be out there, because it so deserves to be out there, and like that's awesome news to hear that. However, as we always do here on Comics Rot Your Brain, I would encourage everybody to, if they really want to get the full experience of the question, go buy the original issues, because they're not that expensive. They'll cost you a few bucks, but like, you could get the first 12 issues of it for probably less than 40 or 50 bucks. And I highly recommend reading those original issues because you get those letter columns we mentioned. You get the recommended reading from Denny O'Neil. You get the reactions of the fans at the time, and in some cases, the creators at the time, to the question, which I think is really fascinating to see the kind of reactions that people were having in that moment to how bold and original and shocking this work was. And then you also get the editorials from your Dick Giordano's and Jeanette Kahn's. So to me, as always, if possible, get the original issues because it's a far more complete experience and it gives you a real snapshot of the time.
Well, here's something interesting. There's a letter. It's kind of like a negative review in issue 8.
I love that. I love when letter columns publish negative letters.
First off, the recommended reading, but by Denny O'Neil is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So he goes, Eric Barnes writes, salutations. I'm going to truncate this, but he goes, salutations, people. I admit I didn't write you in issue 1, 2, or 3. I felt nervous. Company's been around for a while, but I'm writing now, and you may wish I had it. And then he goes, you said the question letter column would have a philosophical slant. Great. But where does everybody get off thinking anything philosophical has to be Oriental? Damn it! You mentioned some great Western philosophies in number 1, but why not use them? Better yet, why not use some great American philosophers? Thoreau, Emerson, Jefferson, Melville. Ever heard of them? You're talking about Vic Sage being an unlikable guy. Maybe he was because he lived a life of violence and wasn't in touch with his true self. But no, you cop out and give me Shang-Chi Revisited.
Oh, Jesus.
And it's like, I read this and he's like, he goes, I saw the questions of thug for justice. Thugs use street fighting. Have you ever seen someone who was never trained by anyone to fight, who fights naturally well? It's savage, untrained, spontaneous fighting. Sure, martial arts is beautiful to watch, despite the fact that it's violent. It's almost ballet, skill against skill, technique against technique. The thing of the sort of thing that martial arts is. Not so street fighting. It's strength, speed, endurance, savagery. Everything else you can think of against you, come against. Sure, it's ugly, but if you think it's about that, so is violence of any kind. Then he breaks off and says, I feel if I had not changed my personal views of life, then I was probably going to become a street fighter. And I'm just like...
This is the letter writer. Oh, shit.
The letter writer. Gets into more shit, and he goes, yeah, but the question becomes philosophical martial artists and the closest character around today who vaguely fits that description is the brain-damaged flaming carrot.
Wow.
Despite all of this, I'm still buying the question, and I'm desperately trying to like it. I'm thinking I may stop buying it, though. I don't know. Eric Barnes, Virginia Beach, Virginia. I'm like, just like, it's a weird letter to reprint.
Wow. See, I love that, though, because I love that the letter columns would not just always print fluff. I love that they would print these hostile letters at times. Like, that's phenomenal.
Oh, yeah, it's awesome.
That's
awesome.
Hilarious, man. That's actually really hilarious.
There's a house ad for this comic called The Outcasts by John Wagner and Alan Grant. I don't even remember this.
Yeah.
It's familiar, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, it's Cam Kennedy. Cam Kennedy drawing it. We should look at that book. It's like a total 2000 AD team. It's like 2000 AD comes to America because all those guys are 2000 AD stalwarts. Wagner, Grant, and Cam Kennedy. So yeah, we should look into that. I don't think I read that at the time either. I'm just looking at the response to that incredibly hostile letter in that letter column, and the response from Mike Gold, the editor, is, I agree. Non-superpowered heroes who are martial arts masters abound in comics. But then again, if you're in that line of work, you have to have some skills. And then he says, by the way, both writer O'Neil and penciler Cowan are quite experienced in the world of martial arts. It would be a shame to let all that knowledge go to waste. It's a pretty classy response from Mike Gold, kind of sidestepping all the hostility there from the letter writer. The letter writer was frankly a bit racist, and
not a bit.
Yeah. Frankly, it just seemed like could not imagine that there could be some worthwhile philosophy coming from other parts of the world. So yeah,
that's fucking crazy. It's fucking crazy.
Well,
so that's That's us talking about The Question. Fantastic book, fantastic work by Dennis, fantastic work by Denny O'Neil.
Yeah.
You're right. It holds up. It really holds up. It's pretty. I'm actually very curious to see the omnibus thing, to know how that, see what it looks recolored.
I wonder.
Not that I like the recoloring stuff.
I wonder if they're going to do that. I wonder if they're going to recolor it. That's a good question, because I think it's in the 80s where I feel like they recolor stuff from earlier eras, but I don't know that they always recolor the 80s stuff. So I'm curious if they will.
Yeah, I mean, it depends if it's newsprint or this higher quality paper. I think this is that Mondo paper you're talking about, which might, excuse me, which might like retain the color better, the color separations better. I think that just a lot of the stuff from the, like 60s and 70s stuff and even early 80s, I just don't know if they even have the original materials to reprint. They might be doing scans of comics that they're then recoloring. I mean, it's unlikely that they're keeping. I mean, look, they don't have the original pages anymore. That's just all been thrown away or sold. So, I don't really know like how they do like reprints of stuff.
Yeah, no, I'll be really curious to see how this turns out. I was listening to a Cartoonist Kayfabe episode recently, and Tom Scholey on that show was talking about how just color sits on different types of paper differently, and it was really fascinating because they were looking at a book that had been reprinted on like glossy white paper, and then they were looking at the original newsprint, and the color looked so much better on the original newsprint because it was soaking in instead of like being sort of rejected by the bright white paper. Popping off the paper. And it was shocking when they were showing the pages side by side because the reprint looked garish. Like it looked garish and gaudy and looked awful. And then I forget what the book was, but the original book looked like, actually the coloring looked a lot more subtle, and it kind of like it popped, but it soaked into the paper more, and it looked just so much more like rich in a way. So like people don't realize what a difference that makes.
I mean, I think there's a version of Mazzucchelli and Miller's Batman Year One that if you buy like a hardback version, there's a special version, like there's some deluxe version of that they use Mazzucchelli's personal scans to recreate the color. And I kind of feel like that's a chance because that's such an important book, and they're trying to make like some some foundational like benchmark version of it, whatever, like a 4K restoration for a movie kind of thing. I think from what I could tell, I don't have it, but it sounded like they used like the original scans that Mazzucchelli had, so they could kind of like match the color when they put it on that white paper. So they would, if they needed to bring it down, the saturation and all that kind of stuff, they could, or that's what the plan was, because they know that it doesn't. I mean, that's a book that if you just ran it, like get the trade paperbacks and stuff like that, and you ran it off of what was originally there, I don't think it would look the same. And that's a book that I don't recall. The book had a very specific color palette to it. So I don't know if that was like done by the same color process that they were doing everything else.
Either it was Richmond Lewis who I'm not sure if she was at the time, but she would become David Mazzucchelli's partner in real life. And so I know Richmond Lewis colored it, and she colored very few comics, but she had a very rich palette, and she was, I think, a painter in real life, and she had just an incredible color sense. But I think it was one of the very few things she colored. But I don't know exactly what her process was at the time. She was definitely on the cutting edge of coloring at that moment.
Yeah, because I remember the covers of those. I remember the most. There's like, I think in the first issue of that, there's like a scene when like Bruce Wayne is dressed up like a drifter and he's walking down the street and he like is fighting this pimp, and you see like Selena Kyle like up in an apartment looking out of her window. She's kind of like half dressed in like, like some lingerie or sex worker gear, and just the way that it's lit, like the neon coming in the window, but it's kind of like dirty neon, and it's just like the colors in that book are fascinating.
Yeah.
Are really fascinating.
I agree. They're beautiful, beautiful colors. And I think that's something that doesn't get enough attention, is how much the color palette on Year One and also on Dark Knight really, really played a huge role, I think, in the reception of those books, and just how stunning those works were, because they didn't look or feel like anything that people had seen before. And I think the coloring was just a massive part of that.
Yeah, well, I think that, I was looking at, I got that book, that DC in the 80s thing, that thing of the experiments.
Oh, yeah.
Looking at the reprint of Ronin #1. I don't remember who colored that.
I think that was Lynn Varley.
Yeah. But Lynn Varley's definitely painting Dark Knight Returns. And that was published on that Baxter paper. So, like, I'm sure that she's actually painting on some sort of like cardstock to whatever. So that's part of why that book has a look, because they knew it wasn't going to be on newsprint. So she had a chance to kind of, she is a painter. I mean, she obviously did like, whatever, Elixir Returns, all that kind of stuff like that. Yeah. So it's like she gave that book like a feeling that was like nothing else, because who else is painting? Who else is a painter like that, with that skill and understanding of color, who's working in comics?
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's why that book had such like that shot when like he's fighting the mutant leader and he like dives at him, and he's like, it's like, it's just the tank, the Batmobile, like the way it's all like feels like it's curled over, and it's all those browns. I mean, like she just had such a way of like, of using a lot of pride, of using a lot of like, I want to say it's like, it was almost like duotone or monotone, but they're colors that were like side by side in the color wheel kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't feel, I mean, there is a monotone shot in there when when Batman like leaps out of the Batmobile for the first time in that, it's like a full color. I mean, it's like a full splash page. I think so. And it feels kind of monotone. She just did so much cool shit in that book. And people don't give the coloring enough, and it when you see these bad reproductions and trade paperbacks. If you're like, oh, they fucked this up. Particularly if you're familiar with the original.
Oh, totally. Yeah, like the recoloring. Yeah, the recoloring is almost always terrible. Like it's almost always worse than the original coloring, and then the paper stock's fucked up. It doesn't match right. Yeah, it's a mess. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that Elektra book too. I think the Elektra Lives Again book, that was the hardcover that came out later, that Lynn Varley painted over Miller's art. That's also one of my favorite things they ever did together. And it's very subtle painted color, but it's just jaw-dropping. It's gorgeous work. So yeah, we could do a whole episode on coloring. But anyways, today's episode was about the beautiful work on The Question. And I really think the whole creative team showed up and did a phenomenal job on The Question. And I mean, it's a book that I'm thrilled to find out that the omnibus is coming, and I hope this signals like a little bit of a Question renaissance for people to go back and rediscover this book. Another thing I'd like to call out as a final note, the logo is really strong too. It's a really good logo.
I mean, it's interesting because
I don't know who did it. I'm guessing probably Todd Klein. Who knows? But Todd Klein did a bunch of the DC logos back then. But whoever did it, great work. Very strong logo.
Oh, it could be Todd Klein. Who's the guy who just they fired him like 2 years ago?
Chiarello?
Yeah, Chiarello.
Yeah, Mark Chiarello is phenomenal.
Which is funny because it feels kind of like a hammer and sickle, like the Soviet.
That's a
play off of that.
That's a good point. Actually, you know what? And yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's very possible. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but it's like,
I don't know. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like, it's weird because I think, it's a question mark, but I almost feel like it's supposed to be a magnifying glass too. Like the question as a detective.
Yeah,
almost.
Well, the Q in the question is definitely that, and then it is a magnifying glass. I mean, that could be the magnifying glass, the Q.
Yeah.
And then the symbol around the is definitely a question mark.
Yeah,
but it could be magnifying glass, so like a double magnifying glass. I don't know. It's a very smart logo.
Yeah, it is, right? Like you could just see the thought that goes into it. And that's another thing with these older books from the 80s is like the logos are, you can see they're so much more smartly designed. There's so much more intentional kind of thought to put into them. And then also, frankly, it's amazing because most of them are hand done. Like these are hand done logos. These aren't fonts. These are hand done logos that are being created by your Todd Kleins and your Mark Chiarellos or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, there's that one guy. He does a lot of work for Image now. His name is like Thomas Muller.
Muller. Yeah, Tom Muller. Yeah, Muller. Yeah, he does some amazing design work.
A lot of amazing covers and designs, but I kind of feel like I mean, look, like Marvel and DC don't put out a lot of they don't put out like a bunch of new books anymore to the new characters, and they don't. Yeah. They're not launching something like The Question like now.
No,
you know, it's always a week. I mean, I don't know. There's like 10 Batman books out a month or some shit like that. I mean, it's kind of crazy what they're doing. So they don't really have the opportunity to do. You know, like I think that was the other day, and I saw like a Checkmate book when I was in the store.
Oh yeah, Bendis just did one with Maliv.
I was tempted to buy it, but I was like, I don't, I got my issues with Bendis, so I didn't buy it. But I remember when the first Checkmate book came out, like that was a cool logo too. I was like, oh, that's a smart logo. That's like, a weird, like I don't know. It's just, but you don't see a lot of that. But again, that's a book that they're reviving from before. Like, The Question is a revival from the old series, but it probably hadn't been published in like 20 years when they did this.
Oh yeah,
sure. Because
it
says on the first issue, it says Cowan and O'Neil and Magyar, they introduced The Question. It's like that's the title on that,
Yeah, that's interesting that they made that choice to say that, because it clearly is the Steve Ditko character, but it is completely reimagined. So like it bears only the most surface resemblance, I think, to what Ditko did. Although I can't say for sure because I didn't read those Ditko issues, but I know that Ditko's Question did not have like all the philosophical leanings and all the new age stuff that O'Neil and Cowan brought to this. I think, yeah, they really did reimagine the character, as far as I know.
For sure.
So,
well, cool, man.
All right.
This week's episode of Comics Rot Your Brain.
Yeah, this was a special supersized episode. We did an extra long episode on The Question because apparently we both had a lot to say, but I think the material was worth it. It's a brilliant book, and I heartily recommend everybody get out there and read The Question. It is really unlike any other comic that you've read. It deserves to be very well remembered.
That is true. So until next time.
All right, next time. Until then, we will see you.